The blade came for the girl's throat, and the girl was no longer where the blade was going. Vosk felt the miss the way a Sarn duelist felt nothing else in a lifetime of the ring, as an absence, a wrongness in the wrist, the edge parting air where meat should have caught it. His arm finished the stroke because a stroke, once launched, could not be recalled. It cut a clean line through the space the human's neck had occupied a fraction of a breath before. Then it kept going, and Vosk went with it, hauled a half-step off his center by the weight of a killing blow that had killed nothing. The girl stood a hand's width to his left. She had not seemed to move. That was the part his mind refused, standing on the proving floor of the Circe reclamation wards under a dome full of hard white daylight. He had watched her the entire time, and she had not seemed to move, and yet the geometry of the room had rearranged itself so that his blade and her throat were no longer acquainted. She looked up at him. She was small even for a human, which made her very small indeed against a full-grown Sarn of the blade caste. Brown hair cut short and uneven, a fading yellow bruise along one cheekbone, a smear of ward grime on the collar of her gray patient's tunic. Her eyes went to the sword, then to his face, with the mild attention of someone checking whether a door had latched. "Again," she said. Vosk did not answer. A Sarn did not speak in the ring. He reset his stance, rolled the tension out of the shoulder that had overreached, and told himself what every warrior of his line told himself when a first pass failed, that it had been a feint of luck, a stutter in his own footing, a thing that would not survive a second attempt. The Sarn had held the coalition's speed records for 11 generations. No creature drawn from the enrolled species had ever been faster than a blade cast strike inside 2 meters. It was not pride, it was measurement. It was written in the Concord's own registries, verified across 9,000 bouts, and Vosk had spent 30 years making certain the number stayed true. He struck again. He did not aim for the throat this time. He aimed for the shoulder, a maiming cut, the kind that ended a fight without ending a life, because the terms of the demonstration forbade a kill, and because a maimed opponent was a humiliated opponent, and Vosk intended humiliation. The blade fell along the shortest line between his intent and her body. It was, by every instrument the wards had bolted to the walls, the fastest cut he had ever thrown. It landed on nothing. The girl had turned her upper body a few degrees. That was all, a lean, the kind of motion a person made to let someone pass in a corridor. The edge slid past her sternum with a finger's clearance, and Vosk, for the second time, felt his own strength betray him, felt the sword drag him forward into a lunge he had not chosen. Somewhere above, in the observation gallery ringing the dome, a Sarn voice made a sound that was not a word. Physician-adept Sethin heard that sound from the gallery rail and understood, with the cold clarity that came to the meridic in moments of consequence, that the room had just changed species. Not literally. But the Sarn delegation had walked onto this station believing themselves the fastest living things the coalition had ever enrolled, and in the span of 2 strokes they had become something else, spectators to a fact that did not care about their belief. Sethin's 4 hands were folded on the rail, gray and long-fingered and very still. That stillness cost him. Every instinct trained into a meridic healer over 40 years of rebuilding broken soldiers wanted to be down on the floor, between the blade and his patient, calling a halt. He did not call a halt. He had been the one to sign the order permitting this demonstration, and he had done it knowing what she was now, and the knowing was a weight he had not yet learned to carry. Beside him, the conquered arbiter turned a pale, flat face toward the floor and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Arbiter Haylist of the Threshold Registry existed to assign numbers to worlds, to weigh a species and file it, to decide which planets were nurseries and which were mistakes. Haylist had come to Circe Station to close a file. The file was open on the slate in front of it, and the slate said Earth, and beneath that a designation that Sethin knew by heart because he had argued against it for a year. Threshold Grade 6. Provisional. Under review. The number 6 meant survivable with caution. It meant a world you could garrison, a species you could enroll and drill and send to the coalition's small wars, a people the conquered had decided were dangerous the way weather was dangerous, a thing to be respected and then forgotten. Sethin had helped write that assessment. He had believed it. He watched his patient decline to be cut for the second time in 9 seconds and understood that he had helped write a lie. On the floor, Vosk straightened. The gallery had gone quiet in the particular way of professionals watching a colleague fail at the one thing he was for. The Sarn duelist looked at the small human, and the small human looked back at him, and she lifted one hand and pushed a strand of hair off the bruise on her cheek. An idle, human gesture, the most ordinary motion in the room, and Vosk flinched. He flinched from a girl brushing her own hair back. A Sarn of the blade Caste, champion of the Kell ring, and his body had jerked because a human hand had moved too fast for him to be sure it was only hair. "You are not permitted to strike her more than 3 times, Halis said. Its voice carried the mild administrative boredom of a clerk reading a rule aloud. The physician's terms. 2 strikes are spent. I heard the terms, Vosk said. Then you have won. Vosk had won. He weighed it. A lifetime of the ring had taught him that a duelist spent his last strike the way a miser spent his last coin, on certainty, never on hope. He did not have certainty. He had watched the fastest cuts of his life meet empty air, and the honest part of him, the part that had kept him alive through 30 years of blades, knew that a third would meet the same. But the Sarn had not sent their champion to Sir Station to be honest. They had sent him to close the human question with an edge, because the alternative, a coalition that no longer believed the Sarn were fastest, was a future the blade Caste could not survive. So he lied to himself one more time and threw the 3rd strike and put everything into it. 40 years of drill, the full extension of a body bred across 11 generations for exactly this, a stroke with no maiming mercy in it at all, a stroke meant to kill and to be seen killing, terms be damned. Sethin's hands tightened on the rail. The girl caught Vosk's wrist. Nobody in the gallery saw her hand move. Sethin, who had spent a year measuring her, who had personally calibrated the instruments that failed to catch her, did not see it either. One instant her arm hung at her side. The next her fingers were closed around the Sarn's forearm just behind the blade, and the sword stopped as though it had struck a wall grown out of the floor. The screech of arrested momentum ran up Vosk's arm into his teeth. His own weight, thrown behind a killing cut, folded against the sudden anchor of a hand smaller than 3 of his fingers. She did not squeeze. She did not twist. She held his wrist still and looked up the length of his arm at his face, and Vosk, a champion of the Kell ring, undefeated in 9 years, understood in the marrow of his species that if the girl had wanted his hand off his body, it would already be on the floor. "That's 3, she said. She let go. The blade dropped from Vosk's slackened grip and rang on the proving floor, a single bright note under the daylight dome, and in the gallery no Sarn made a sound at all. Sethin exhaled slowly, through the 3 vents along his throat. He had watched her spare a killing arm the way another person might close a drawer. No anger in it, no triumph. She had simply reached the end of the demonstration's arithmetic, 3 strikes, 3 failures, and stopped, because stopping was the thing the arithmetic called for. Below, Vosk stood over his fallen sword and did not pick it up. "Arbiter," Sethin's voice was quiet, but the dome carried it. "You have your assessment." Halis did not answer at once. Its pale face was turned down toward the floor, toward the girl who had already lost interest in the Sarn and was flexing her caught hand open and closed, testing it, the way a person tested a joint that had done a thing the person had not consciously ordered. The slate in the arbiter's grip still said threshold grade 6. Halis looked at it for a long moment. "I have a question," Halis said, "before I have an assessment." "Ask it." "When you signed the order for this demonstration," the arbiter's flat eyes rose to meet the physician's, "did you know she would win?" Sethin considered the honest answer and the safe one, and found, as he often did in the presence of the Concord's clerks, that they were the same. "I knew no one would touch her," he said. "Winning was never the question. The question was whether the coalition would believe its own instruments or its own comfort. I signed the order to force the choice." "You forced it," Halist agreed. It looked down at the floor once more. "Physician, I have read your intake file on the human. I have read the surgical record you filed, and the addenda, and the objection you lodged against your own procedure 11 days after you performed it." A pause. "I would like to hear it from you and not from the record. What did you take out of her?" And there it was, the question Sethin had carried since the 11th day, the one he had lodged against himself in a formal objection no one had asked him to file. He looked at the girl on the floor, small and grime-collared and utterly unbothered, brushing her hair back again with a hand that no longer flinched anyone, and he told the arbiter the truth. "A delay," Sethin said. "I took out a delay." The girl had come to Sir's station in a casualty rack, one body among 200 pulled off a border world after the Concord's small war with the Ale went briefly loud. Her name was on the manifest as SAVIL, W Human Auxiliary, Rifle Company, 19 standard years. She had a fractured skull and a bleed pressing on the part of the brain that told the hands what to do, and by the field medic's honest note she should have arrived dead. Sethin had rebuilt worse. The Meridic did not fight the coalition's wars, they cleaned up after them, and a physician adept of 40 years had put more soldiers back together than most generals had spent. He opened the human skull, expecting the ordinary catastrophe of a brain under pressure, and found instead the thing that would cost him a year of sleep. He did not describe it later in the surgical record as a discovery. He described a repair. The bleed was drained, the pressure relieved, the fracture set with the patient bonework the Meridic were famous for. All true. What he left out of the first filing and put back into the 11th day addendum, in a hand that shook, was the delay. Every enrolled species had won. It was not a flaw, it was the oldest safety in biology. Between the moment a mind decided to move and the moment the body obeyed, there was a gap, a hair of time in which the signal was checked, weighed, permitted. The gap kept a creature from tearing its own tendons, from striking before it had finished seeing, from turning every startle into a death. Sarn had a small delay, honed across generations of the ring until it was nearly nothing, and the coalition called them the fastest living things because of it. Meridic had a long one, slow and deliberate, which was why the Meridic were healers and not soldiers. The delay was the governor on the engine. No one built an engine without one. The human's delay was the widest Sethin had ever measured. That was the thing that had stopped his 4 hands over the open skull. Human reflex was a joke among the enrolled species, a punchline the Sarn told in the mess halls, slow as a human's hands, and it was true on the instruments. Humans were measurably, embarrassingly slow to move. Sethin had assumed, as everyone assumed, that this meant human minds were slow. Under the light of his surgical field with the living signal laid bare in front of him, he understood that it meant the opposite. The human mind was not slow. The human governor was enormous. The gap between a human's intent and a human's motion was the longest leash in the coalition, not because the animal was sluggish, but because the animal on the other end of the leash was something that had needed the longest leash anyone had ever grown. He closed her skull and did not sleep. The addendum filed on the 11th day said it plainly. The subject's neural latency is not a deficit, it is a restraint. The species evolved on a world where its own reflexes outran its judgment badly enough that survival required a governor of unprecedented size. Human beings are not slow. Human beings are throttled. I believe the throttle can be removed. I believe it should not be, by me or anyone, without the subject's full understanding of what she would become. He had believed that. He still believed it. And then Ren Saville had woken up, healed, and asked him a question that unmade the whole careful architecture of his restraint. She had asked him why her hands felt late. He remembered the moment with the awful precision the Meridic brought to their regrets. She had been sitting up in the recovery bay 3 weeks after, testing a cup of water, reaching for it, missing, reaching again, and she had looked at her own hand with an expression he had learned to read on humans, the flat one that meant a human was angry in the cold way humans got angry, the way that did not raise the voice. "My hands feel late," she had said. They always felt a little late. Since the surgery they feel late by a mile. And Sethin, who did not lie to patients, had told her why. He had told her about the governor. He had shown her the measurement, the enormous leash, the throttle, the gap the size of no gap he had ever seen. He had told her, because she had a right to know, that the injury had loosened the throttle and the healing had let it snap most of the way shut again, and that the lateness she felt was her own nature returning, the same lateness every human lived inside and never noticed because they had never known anything else. And Ren Saville had listened to all of it and been quiet for a while, and then she had said, "Can you take it out?" Not a question. He had recorded it as a question in the file because the file had a place for questions, but there had been no question mark in her voice. She had asked the way a person asked for a door to be opened when they had already decided to walk through it. He had said no. He had said it for 8 days. He had cited the addendum he had written against himself, had walked her through every reason a healer refused, that the governor was there for a reason, that a body could hurt itself moving faster than a body was meant to, that no one in the coalition's long history had ever chosen to cut their own oldest safety, and there was no map for what waited on the other side. She had listened to all of it, every time, with the patience of someone waiting out weather. And on the 8th day she had asked him one question back, and it was the question that beat him. If a Sarn came in here born without theirs, she had said, and you could give it back, would you? Or would you say the leash is who they are now and leave them slow? He had no answer that survived it. The Sarn spent generations shortening their governor by breeding and by drill, and the coalition celebrated them for it. And no healer had ever stood in a bay and told a Sarn duelist that a short leash was a mutilation. The only reason to refuse Ren Saville was that a human with no governor was a thing the coalition had never seen and could not measure and would not be able to control. And Sethin had looked on the 8th day at what that reason actually was and found that it was fear, and that it was not his fear for her. It was the coalition's fear of her, and he had been carrying it for them without being asked. He had performed the procedure on the 9th day. He did not, in any record, describe how. There were kinder omissions than the truth, and the truth of the thing was a door that did not need to be left open behind him. He would only ever say, to Halist and to himself, and to the objection he lodged 2 days later against his own hand, that he had cut the delay. He had taken out the leash. He had removed the gap between what the human decided and what the human did, and he had closed her up, and he had waited to see what he had made. What he had made was a girl who could not be touched. The first sign was small and terrible. A tray had slipped from an orderly's grip near her bed on the 2nd day after a clatter, a startle, and Sethin, watching from across the bay, had seen the falling tray stop in the air a hand's width off the floor, caught, held level. Not a drop of the medicine on it spilled. Ren had been looking the other way. She had not decided to catch it. Her hand had simply been there, arrived, before the deciding part of her had finished turning her head. She had looked down at the tray in her own grip with the same flat, cold interest she gave to everything now, and set it on the bed, and said nothing. That was the moment Sethin understood what the governor had been governing. It had never been her speed. Her speed had always been there, coiled the whole length of that enormous leash. The governor had been governing her choice. The delay had been the room in which a human decided whether to move, the space where judgment lived. He had not made her faster. She had always been that fast underneath. He had taken away the place where she got to decide. And she had not become a monster. That was the part he could not fit into the objection he filed. A creature with no gap between fury and act should have been a catastrophe on legs, a reflex with a person attached. Ren Saville was the calmest patient in the ward. She caught falling trays and did not spill them. She stopped killing blows a hand's width from her own throat and let go without a mark. Somewhere in her, the judgment that used to live in the delay had moved. Sethan did not know where, could not measure it, had no instrument for it. And it did its work now with no room to work in at all, in the no time between a Sarn's intent and a Sarn's edge. And it did the work perfectly, every time, and chose mercy every time. And he did not understand how, and it frightened him more than the speed ever could. He said none of that to HFYStories. He said only, a delay. I took out a delay and let the arbiter make of it what a clerk of worlds would make. HFYStories wrote nothing on the slate. That was what Vosk noticed, standing over his own dropped sword with the whole gallery watching him not pick it up. The conquered clerk had come to close a number, and it had not written the number, and a Sarn learned early to read the silences of clerks the way he read the silence before a strike. Vosk bent, took up his blade and sheathed it. The motion should have restored something to him. It restored nothing. He climbed the ramp out of the proving floor to where his Caste master waited, and duelmaster Reth met him at the top with the flat amber stare of a Sarn who had watched his champion fail 3 times and intended to pretend he had not. Luck, Reth said low so the gallery would not hear. 3 passes of luck. The floor was against you. We contest the terms. There were no terms wrong with the floor, Vosk said. We contest the terms. Reth's mandible plates set hard. One duelist blunted conditions, the physician's rules. Of course a trained animal can slip 3 cuts in a padded room. Give me a real floor. Give me the Caste. And there it was, the thing Vosk had known would come the instant his 3rd strike met her held hand. The Sarn had not built 11 generations of supremacy to lose it to a slate that declined to write a 6. Reth would not accept a single champion's failure. He would demand the Caste, and the coalition would let him, because the coalition also did not want to believe what the floor had just shown it. It was easier for everyone in the dome to believe in Vosk's bad luck than in a human who could not be cut. Arbiter, Reth's voice rose now, pitched to carry all the private doubts scrubbed out of it. The blade Caste does not accept a demonstration run under a healer's terms. One duelist forbidden to kill on a floor calibrated by the very physician whose work is under judgment. It proves nothing. We request full conditions. Live blades, no strike limit. The Caste, not the champion. He let the plates of his crest flare, the old display. If the human is what the physician claims, she will survive it. If she is a trick of instruments, the coalition should see the trick fail before it rewrites a world. The gallery stirred. Sethan came down the gallery stair fast, all 4 hands rising, and Vosk saw the healer's alarm and understood that the Meridic had not expected this and did not want it, and that too was information. The physician had built his demonstration to make a point and stop. Reth had just turned the point into a killing floor. That is not a demonstration, Sethan said. That is an execution with witnesses. I will not consent to it. You consented her to the blade already, Reth said. You cannot now claim the blade is too sharp. 3 strikes or 300, the edge is the same edge. If she is safe from 1 Sarn, she is safe from 20 by your own claim. Unless, he let the word hang, mild, poisonous. Unless the physician does not believe his own instruments after all. HFYStories raised one hand, and both of them stopped. The arbiter had a way of ending noise simply by beginning to speak, the authority of a creature that could file a world out of existence with a stylus. The registry does not assign a grade on the strength of a single controlled event, HFYStories said. The physician is correct that live conditions with no limit constitute a lethal trial, and the registry does not order lethal trials of enrolled auxiliaries. A pause, and the pale flat eyes moved to the proving floor, where the girl still stood, still uninterested, watching the 3 of them argue about her as though they were whether she was waiting out. However, The duelmaster is also correct that a demonstration run under the treating physician's terms and the treating physician's instruments cannot, alone, rewrite a threshold grade. The registry requires a controlled trial it has designed, not the physician's, not the Caste's, the registry's own. Then design it, Reth said. I will. Halist looked down at Ren Saville. But the registry does not decide for the subject. She is an enrolled auxiliary, not a specimen. The trial requires her consent, and consent, not the Caste's appetite, sets its limits. The arbiter raised its voice just enough to carry to the floor. Auxiliary Saville, the Blade Caste disputes what this floor has shown. The registry can convene a trial of its own design to settle it, controlled, witnessed, with limits I will set and you may refuse. Or you may decline, and the dispute stands unresolved, and your world keeps its provisional 6. The choice is filed to you and no one else. What is your answer? The dome went quiet, the particular quiet of a great many creatures waiting to see whether a small thing would flinch. Ren looked up at the gallery, found the arbiter's pale face among the crowd, and gave her answer with the total economy that Sethin had come to dread, because economy in a human was not calm. It was a human who had already finished the sentence and was only now saying it aloud. He said his Caste never got touched in the ring. She tipped her head a fraction toward Reth. That's a nice record, I'd like to see it. It was not consent, quite. It was worse. Sethin heard the gallery hear it, heard the Sarn who had come to watch a human proven a trick, instead hear a human, small and grime-collared and utterly unbothered, express a mild professional interest in the Caste's 11th generation, record the way a person expressed interest in a wall they were about to lean on. Reth's crest plates flattened. Even the duelmaster who wanted this felt the temperature of it and did not like the cold. That is not the answer of a soldier, Reth said. That is arrogance. You asked for the Caste, Ren said. I'm agreeing with you. I don't know why you're upset about it. Sethin closed his eyes for the length of one slow, meridic breath. He had spent a year building a wall of terms and limits around what he had made, and in 2 sentences his patient had walked through the wall and invited the Caste to test itself against her. And the awful part, the part that would keep him from sleeping again tonight, was that she had not done it out of pride. There was no heat in her at all. She had simply been offered a fact she did not yet possess. How many Sarn can I not be touched by? And she wanted the fact, and the only way to get it was to let them try. Arbiter, Sethin said, and his voice was steadier than he felt. I withdraw my objection to a trial on conditions. I set the medical limits or there is no trial at all. I am her physician and the registry's own rules give me that. No lethal intent, no strike I cannot see stopped. And if I call a halt, the floor clears in that instant, whatever the Caste's appetite. He looked at Reth. You want your record tested. You may have it tested. You do not get to spend her to save it. Reth's amber eyes held his for a long moment. There was calculation in them, and under the calculation something the duelmaster would never name aloud, the first cold draft of a doubt, the same one that had run up Vosk's arm when the sword stopped against a hand smaller than 3 of his fingers. Reth had watched his champion fail. Reth did not, in the honest cellar of himself, believe it was luck. And he was about to send 20 of his Caste onto a floor against the thing that had made the luck, because the alternative was a coalition that stopped believing the Sarn were fastest, and the duelmaster had decided he would rather bury his Caste than watch it become ordinary. Set your medical limits, healer, Reth said. They will not matter. You will not need to call a halt because there will be nothing to halt. The Caste has never been touched. He turned toward the ramp, toward his waiting warriors, and cast the last of it over his shoulder, meaning it for the gallery, meaning it for the record. By dawn the coalition will remember why. Below, on the proving floor, Ren Saville rolled her caught hand open and closed one more time, testing the joint the sword had failed to reach, and watched the duelmaster go with the mild, patient attention of someone who had just been promised the thing she asked for. Sethin found her that evening in the long recovery ward. in the chair she was not supposed to be sitting in, beside the bed of a patient she was not supposed to know. The ward ran the length of the station's sunward flank, a hall of low beds under a wall of tall filtered windows that held the light of the planet below, a green-white world the Coalition had named and garrisoned, and would garrison long after everyone in this room was dead. At this hour the light came in flat and bright and cool, the way Sethin had always liked it, the light he had rebuilt 10,000 soldiers under. Wren sat in the wash of it with her boots off and her feet tucked under her, and in the bed beside her lay the ale. The ale were the enemy. Not a large war, not a proud one. A border the conquered wanted, and the ale had been standing on, and the Coalition had sent auxiliaries to take it, and Wren's rifle company had been the auxiliaries, and this particular ale had been on the other side of the same 3 days that had cracked her skull. It had come off the same casualty racks. Sethin had rebuilt them in adjacent bays without either of them conscious to object. The ale was young as the girl in ale years, and it had lost the use of its lower limbs to the same shellfire that had nearly killed her, and Sethin was slowly, patiently, growing it a way to walk again. Wren had been sitting with it for 3 weeks. Sethin had watched it happen and not understood it and not stopped it. The ale had woken up in a Coalition ward, a prisoner among the species that had shot it off its own border, and the first face it had learned to trust was the face of the human who had done part of the shooting. They did not share a language. She brought it water it could not yet reach on its own. She sat in the wrong chair in the sunward light and did nothing much, and the ale slept easier for it, and Sethin had stopped pretending he understood humans some while ago. "You should not have said yes to the Caste," Sethin said. He pulled the second chair around and folded himself into it, all 4 hands settling. "You should have let it stand unresolved. A provisional 6 is a survivable thing. What Reth wants to make tomorrow is not." "You set the medical limits," Wren said. She did not look away from the window. "You said so. Limits on a floor with 20 blades on it are a hope, not a wall. If one of them means it, truly means it, I may not be able to call the halt in time." "You won't have to." She said it without weight, the way she said everything now, and it was worse than boasting would have been. "None of them will land." Sethin looked at her for a while. This was the thing he had come to say and could not find the front door of. "That is what frightens me," he said at last. "Not that you will be hurt, that you are certain you will not be. You were not certain of anything before. I read your intake. You were a 19-year-old rifle auxiliary who had seen 3 days of a war and been terrified the whole time by your own field notes. Now you sit in the wrong chair and tell me 20 blades will not land, and you are simply right. And there is no fear anywhere in you, and I took the fear out of you with my own 4 hands, and I do not know what I put in its place." Wren was quiet, the ale breath slow in the bed beside her, deep in the long healing sleep the meritic bonework induced. She reached out without looking and adjusted the edge of its blanket where a limb had shifted, a small automatic kindness, and Sethin watched her hand do it and thought again about the tray that had not spilled. "You didn't take the fear out," she said. "You couldn't reach it. It's not in the nerves." She turned from the window then and looked at him, and her flat, cold eyes were not unkind. That was the thing he kept having to relearn about her. The coldness was not cruelty. It was only the absence of the room where feeling used to slow her down. "Before, when something came at me, I'd feel it coming and my body would be late. That gap you keep talking about. In that gap I was afraid. The whole war I lived in that gap. See the round come in, feel the fear. Hands too slow to matter, wait to find out if I die. 3 days of that. You're right that I was terrified. I was terrified because I was slow and I knew it." Sethin said nothing. He had never heard her say this much. "Now there's no gap," she said it simply. "The thing comes at me and I'm already not there. There's no waiting to find out. So there's nothing to be afraid of, not because you made me brave, because you took away the part where I had to wait. The fear needed the gap. You closed the gap." She turned back to the window. "I'm not certain 20 blades won't land because I stopped being afraid. I'm certain because I felt where the sword was going before he'd finished deciding to send it, and I'll feel where 20 go. That's not courage. It's just arithmetic. You keep looking for the monster you made. There isn't one. There's just a girl who doesn't have to wait anymore. The light moved a fraction across the floor as the station turned. Sethin sat with it. He had come here braced for arrogance, for a wildness, for the reflex with a person attached that the addendum had feared. And instead his patient had explained her own nature to him with more honesty than he had managed in a year of filings. And the honesty was the most frightening thing of all because it was sane, and it was clear-eyed, and it meant that the calm was not a symptom. It was a person. He had not made a weapon that happened to look like a girl. He had freed a girl who had always, underneath the leash, been exactly this fast and exactly this steady, and had spent 19 years afraid inside a gap she never asked for. Why the ale, he said finally, because it was the other thing he could not solve. It shot at your company, you shot at it. And you sit with it every day. For the first time in weeks, something crossed her face that was not flat. It was there and gone, too fast even for the ones who could not be touched to hide. Because it's the only other person in this station who was in that gap with me, Ren said. 3 days of being too slow and scared to death. It knows exactly what that's like. You don't. Reth doesn't. Nobody with a short leash knows what it's like to live your whole life a beat behind your own hands and afraid of it. She adjusted the ale's blanket again. It's not my enemy. My enemy was whoever decided that border was worth 3 days of us being that scared. The ale was just in the gap with me. So I sit with it. There's no gap now, but I remember it. Somebody should. Sethin rose slowly and stood in the flat, bright light of the world below, and understood that he had spent a year filing objections against the wrong thing. He had thought he'd removed a safety. He had thought the danger was the speed. The danger had never been the speed. The danger was that the coalition was about to send 20 blades against a person who remembered exactly what it was to be helpless and afraid, and who had decided, with no gap left to slow the decision, that she would not do to anyone else what that gap had done to her, and that mercy in a creature that could not be touched was going to look, to 20 proud warriors, exactly like contempt. Get some rest, he said. The trial is at first light. I don't really sleep anymore, Ren said to the window. But you should. You look tired, Doctor. You've looked tired for a year. He left her in the wrong chair in the light, with the enemy she had decided to keep. And he did not sleep. And outside the tall windows the garrisoned world turned its bright face up at the station and did not care about any of them. At first light the dome filled with sun. The registry had designed the trial the way the registry designed everything, as a measurement, stripped of ceremony. Halis stood at the floor's edge with 3 of its own instruments, squat gray drums on tripods that turned to follow the girl, and it read the terms aloud in the flat voice of a clerk reading weather. The floor would be run in passes. Each pass, a fixed number of Sarn duelists would attempt to touch the human, not cut, not kill. The arbiter's blades were capped with soft blunts the registry had fitted itself, and any strike that landed anywhere on her body scored, and a single scoring touch ended the trial and settled the grade in the Caste's favor. The physician held the halt. The registry held the count. Vosk stood in the first rank with the blunt on his blade, and hated the blunt with a purity he had not felt in years. A capped edge was an insult to the whole point of a Sarn. But he understood the arbiter's logic even as he hated it. If the human could not be touched, then the sharpness of the edge was irrelevant, and capping the blades removed the Caste's ability to claim afterward that a real edge would have flown truer. The blunt made the trial honest. Vosk wanted it dishonest. He wanted, very badly, for the edge to matter. First pass, Halis said, 3. 3 of them went in. Vosk was not one. Reth had held him back for later ranks, and Vosk understood that too. The duelmaster wanted the human worn down before he spent his champion again, and Vosk let the small insult of it settle into the larger one of the cap. The 3 went in fast and clean, a Caste triangle, the oldest closing form the Sarn had, one high, two low, no room between them, the form that had ended 9,000 bouts. It was beautiful. Vosk had drilled it 10,000 times. He watched it break against the girl the way water broke against a stone, and the worst of it was that the stone did not seem to do anything. She was inside the triangle, and then she was outside it, and the three blunts crossed the space where she had been standing and touched each other, and one of his castmates took a capped edge across the wrist from another and hissed, and the pass was over, and the girl was standing 4 paces clear, brushing dust off her sleeve. The dome made no sound. The Sarn had a great many observers in the gallery, and not one of them cheered the form, because the form had failed, and a Sarn did not cheer a failed form. "No score," Halis said. "Second pass, 5." 5 went in. Vosk watched the arbiter's gray drums turn to follow her and thought about what they must be recording, the same nothing his own eyes recorded, motion below the floor of what a Sarn could resolve. 5 blades, 3 angles, the collapsing star the Caste used against numbers, and she went through the gaps in it that a Sarn's eye said were not there. She did not strike. That was the thing the gallery was beginning to mutter about, low, uneasy. She never struck back. She slipped, she leaned. She was a hand's width from where the blade wanted her, and never more than that, never a flourish, never a wasted centimeter. And she never once lifted a hand against any of them. 5 capped blades searched for her for the length of a pass and touched nothing, and she ended it standing among them with her hands loose at her sides, and one of the 5, young, spun on her with a snarl and a strike that had real want in it, cap or no cap. And she caught the blade flat between 2 fingers, stopped it dead, and looked at the young Sarn over it with an expression of such total mildness that the warrior stumbled back from her as if scalded. "That is a touch," Reth called from the rank. "She touched the blade. Score it against her." "She stopped a strike outside the terms," Halis said without heat. "The terms score a touch on her body is untouched. The strike was yours, unsanctioned after the pass. No score, third pass, 7. Vosk saw Reth's crest flatten and understood that the duelmaster had just tried to steal the trial on a technicality and been refused by the one creature in the dome no Sarn could intimidate, and that Reth now had nothing left but the thing he had been saving. Numbers. More blades than a body could account for. It was not a strategy. It was a hope dressed as one, and Vosk, who had thrown his last strike on hope once already, felt something in his chest he had not felt since he was a novice. He named it because a Sarn named his fears in order to master them. It was dread. 7, Halis said again, when Reth did not move. Reth sent Vosk in with the 7. They went in on the count and Vosk went with them, and for the length of that pass he was 19 again, a novice in his first ring because nothing his 40 years knew was any use. He had planned it on the walk to the floor. He would not aim where she was. He would aim where she would have to go, cut off the slip before she took it, put his blunt in the empty space her body kept choosing, meet her in the gap she opened. It was clever. It was the cleverest thing any Sarn had thought in this dome. He threw the blunt into the empty space to his left, where his 40 years told him she would slip. And she was not there either. She was to his right, past him, and he understood in the half-instant of failing that she had felt him decide to cover her slip, and had simply chosen a different one, that there was no space he could preempt because she was reading the choice before the choice finished forming. In the no time he did not have and she did, and that a Sarn could not outthink a creature that arrived at his conclusions before he did. 7 blade, 7 blunts. The pass ran its full count, and not one of them so much as brushed her sleeve, and Vosk came out of it breathing hard through his throat vents with his crest flat and his pride a cold cinder in his chest. And behind him the girl stood in the sun with dust on her collar and no expression at all. And the gallery of the Sarn, the Caste that had never been touched in the ring, that had held the coalition's speed for 11 generations, made a sound at last. It was not a cheer. It was the low collective exhale of a people watching the load-bearing wall of their own identity come away from the foundation, and Vosk had never heard it from his own kind before, and he hoped he would never hear it again. "No score," Halist said. Its flat voice did not change, but its gray drums had stopped turning. They had, Vosk realized, given up trying to resolve her some passes ago. The registry has run its trial. 22 sanctioned strikes across 3 passes, 0 touches. The instruments record no measurable strike within human tolerance across the sample. The arbiter turned its pale face up toward the gallery, toward Reth. "Duelmaster, the registry's finding is sufficient to amend the grade. Do you accept the finding, or do you dispute the registry's own trial as you disputed the physician's?" And Vosk watched his Caste master stand at the floor's edge and refuse to answer, and knew, with the last cold clarity of a duelist who has already lost, that Reth was not going to accept anything, that Reth had brought more than blunted blades to Sir Station, and that the trial the registry thought it had just finished had not, in Reth's mind, even begun. "The Caste has not accepted the count," Reth said before Halist could close the trial. He came a step onto the floor. 3 passes, escalating, and each time the number rose and the result held. "You will tell the coalition that proves her, and the coalition will want to believe you because the alternative frightens it. But a doubter will say the passes were too small. 7 blades in a choreographed count is not a battlefield. Give me the whole Caste. Every duelist on this floor at once, no count, no form, a swarm, the way a real enemy comes. If she slips that, I will accept the finding with my own mouth. If she does not, the finding is a healer's theater." Vosk heard the desperation in it and knew the whole dome heard it too. It was the last hope of a duelmaster who had run out of arithmetic, the belief that numbers alone, enough of them, would find the gap that skill had not. Vosk had believed it himself, on the walk to the floor. He had stopped believing it somewhere in the 7 pass, when he threw True into the empty space and she was simply elsewhere. But he understood why Reth reached for it. When a Sarn had nothing left, he reached for more blades, because more blades was the only prayer the Caste had ever been taught. Halist's gray drums turned to the girl. "Auxiliary Savile. The duelmaster requests an unstructured pass, full number, capped blades, no strike limit. The medical halt remains with your physician. You may refuse." "I won't refuse," Ren said. She rolled her shoulders, the first thing close to preparation Vosk had seen her do, and he realized a beat later that it had not been preparation at all, it had been a courtesy, a human making the small motions of getting ready so the Caste would not feel she found them beneath the trouble. "Send all of them. It's a fair question. He should get to ask it." So they sent all of them. It was not a form. That was the thing Vosk would carry out of the dome. That for the first time in 11 generations, the Caste abandoned the forms entirely, and came at a single small target the way a real enemy came. All of them at once, from every angle the floor allowed, capped blades searching for any part of her at speeds that turned the whole center of the dome into a blur of plated bodies and bright metal. It was the most blades the Sarn had ever thrown at one creature. It was everything the Caste was. She went through it like water finding the floor. Vosk was in it, and so he saw it the only way it could be seen, which was from inside, which was to say he did not see it at all. He committed to a cut, and she was gone from it before his arm finished, and the space she left was already being filled by 2 of his castmates whose blades met each other, because the target had ceased to occupy the geometry they had all agreed she must occupy. She did not strike one of them. 20-odd blades, no limit, no form, everything the Caste had, and she spent the entire pass moving through the swarm without lifting a hand against any part of it. A small, unhurried shape threading gaps that closed a half-instant after she was through them. And the only contact in the whole pass was Sarn blade on Sarn blade, the Caste fouling itself around an absence. Until Halist's flat voice called the pass, and the plated bodies staggered to a halt, breathing hard through their throat vents, and the girl was standing at the dead center of all of them with dust on her collar and her hands loose at her sides, untouched, unhurried, faintly, terribly patient. The dome made the sound again, the long collective exhale. Vosk had hoped never to hear it twice, and here it was. Worse this time, because this time there was no form left to blame, no cap to hide behind, no count too small to matter. The caste had thrown everything it was at her and fouled only itself, and every Sarn in the dome understood in the same instant that the thing they had built 11 generations of pride on was over, not diminished, not challenged, over, and that they had watched it end without the human so much as closing a hand. No score, Halis said. The caste has thrown its full number at full will, 0 touches. The registry's finding stands and is now beyond reasonable dispute. Its pale, flat eyes rose to Reth. Duelmaster, you gave your word before this pass. If she slipped it, you would accept the finding with your own mouth. She slipped it. The floor is witness. Say the words. And Vosk watched his caste master stand at the center of a fouled and gasping caste, in the flat bright daylight of a dome that had just watched his entire people become ordinary. And he watched the words that honor required refuse to come. And he understood, in the set of Reth's crest, and the cold new stillness that settled over the duelmaster, that Reth was not going to say them, and was not going to accept anything, and had already begun to reach past the trial entirely, for whatever he had brought to Sur Station beneath it. I dispute the finding, Reth said. Halist's gray drums swiveled toward the duelmaster. The arbiter did not sigh. Sethin had never seen a conquered clerk sigh, but something in the set of its pale shoulders admitted the tedium of a creature that had run an honest trial for someone who had never intended to honor it. On what ground, Halis said. The registry designed the trial. The registry set the count. The registry fitted the caps. 22 strikes, 0 touches. Name the ground. The ground of the cap. Reth walked out onto the floor now, past the ranks of his own duelists, and the caste parted for him, and Sethin, standing at the floor's edge with his hand on the halt he prayed he would not need, felt the whole dome tilt toward something it could not yet see. The physician told this room that a capped edge and a true edge fly the same, because she cannot be touched by either. Convenient. It lets him try his creature in soft conditions and call the result proof. But a cap changes the strike. A Sarn who knows the edge is dead throws differently than a Sarn who knows it is blunt. Every duelist on this floor pulled, whether they willed it or not, because the body does not spend everything on a blow it knows cannot kill. You measured 22 men holding back. You measured nothing. That is not true, Vosk said. He had not meant to say it. It came out of him from a place beneath decision, and the whole dome heard it, and Reth turned his amber eyes on his own champion with a slowness that promised consequence. Vosk stood in the rank and did not take it back. He had thrown his 7 strike into the empty space with everything a Sarn had, cap or no cap, because by that pass he had stopped believing a cap or an edge would change the outcome by so much as a hair, and to let Reth tell the dome that the caste had been pulling was a lie that dishonored the failure, and a Sarn could bear a failure but not a lie about one. I threw true, Vosk said. Cap or edge, I threw true, and I missed by the width of a choice she made faster than mine. So did every duelist here. The duelmaster names the cap because the duelmaster has nothing else to name. You forget yourself, Reth said softly. No, Vosk's crest was flat, but his voice was steady. For the first time in 30 years I remember exactly what I am. I am the fastest blade of a caste that is no longer the fastest thing in the coalition. That is the finding. Disputing the cap will not unmake it. It will only make us liars as well as slow. The gallery had gone very still. Sethin understood he was watching a thing rarer than the girl's speed, a caste eating itself in public, the champion and the master splitting along the fault the human had opened simply by standing on a floor and declining to be cut. It should have been the end of it. Reth had lost the trial, and now he had lost his champion, and a wiser creature would have accepted the grade and taken his caste home to grieve its supremacy in private. Reth was not wiser. He was a duel master of the Sarn, and he had come to Sur Station with a second plan folded beneath the first, the way a duelist kept a second blade, and he drew it now. The physician says his creature cannot be touched, Reth said, and he raised his voice so the whole dome and the whole record would carry it. I believe him. I have watched and I believe him. So the trial was always the wrong trial. You cannot measure a thing that cannot be touched by trying to touch it. You measure it by making it do what it is. He turned slow until his amber eyes found Sethin at the floor's edge. The physician cut the oldest safety out of an animal and calls the result a soldier. There is one question the registry never asked. When you take the leash off a predator and you corner it, and you threaten the thing it guards, does it choose? Or does it only move? Cold went down Sethin's spine, all the way to the floor. He saw where it was going a half-instant before it went there, and a half-instant was not enough, because he was not the one without a gap. An animal with no leash and no gap does not choose, Reth said. It cannot. That is what the physician's own filings say. He removed the room where choice lives. I have read them. He wrote it himself. So I will show this dome the truth the trial hid. I will threaten the healer she guards, and she will do to me what the reflex commands with no gap to stop it, and you will all watch a human tear a Sarn duelmaster apart at a speed no eye can follow, and then you will know what the physician made. Not a soldier. A weapon with the trigger filed off. His hand went to his side and it did not come up with a capped blade. And a weapon that cannot help but kill is not enrolled. It is destroyed. The blade he drew had no cap on it. He did not go for the girl. He went for Sethin. Sethin had time to think one thing, and the thing he thought was, she is 40 paces away. 40 paces, the width of the hole proving floor. Reth stood astride from him with a true edge already moving, a duelmaster's draw cut, the fastest opening a Sarn had, and the girl was 40 paces back among the caps and the Caste, and there was no leash in the coalition long enough to cross 40 paces in the time a Sarn took to finish a draw. Sethin was going to die on a floor he had built, killed to prove a point about the patient he had freed, and the last clear thought of a 40-year physician was that Reth was right about the arithmetic and wrong about everything else, and that he would not live to see which mattered more. The edge came for the vents of his throat. It stopped a finger's width away. Not on his skin, in the air. A hand had closed around Reth's wrist from the side, the same small, grime-collared hand that had stopped Vosk's killing stroke on the first morning, and the true edge hung at Sethin's throat close enough that he felt the cold coming off the metal, close enough to part the outermost membrane of his neck vent and no closer. And it did not move, because the wrist that drove it could not move, because the girl was standing at Reth's side with her fingers closed around his forearm and her eyes on the blade. Sethin had not seen her cross the floor. No one had. The gallery would say, afterward, that she had not crossed it at all, that she had simply ceased to be 40 paces away and begun to be here. The way a picture cut between two frames, and the registry's own drums, reviewed later, held 9 frames of an empty floor, and then 1 frame, single, of a human hand already closed on a duelmaster's wrist, with no frame of the crossing in between. She had run the width of the proving floor in the no time between Reth's decision and Reth's cut, and she had arrived with her hand exactly where it needed to be and stopped a true edge of finger from a healer's throat, and she had not, Sethin saw, so much as changed her breathing. Reth strained against her grip. Every fiber of a duelmaster's body, 11 generations of bred speed and 40 years of drill, thrown into the single task of pushing a capped-off finger of edge across the last centimeter into a healer's throat, and the blade did not advance a hair. Her hand held it where it was. She was not straining. Sethin was close enough to see that she was not straining at all. Her arm was loose, her stance easy, her whole body at the mild rest of a person holding a door. "You said something," Ren told the duelmaster. Her voice was flat and low and entirely without heat, and in the silence of the dome it carried to every rank. "You said I can't choose, that there's no room in me to choose because the doctor took it out. You read his files and you decided that meant I'm a trigger somebody filed the safety off of." She turned her head and looked at Reth, up the length of his straining arm into his amber eyes. You're standing here alive because you're wrong." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The doctor didn't take out the room where I choose," she said. "He took out the room where I wait. Those aren't the same room. You've never been in either one because your leash is so short you've never had to know the difference. I've been choosing this whole time. Every pass. 22 blades, and I chose not to break one arm, and you called it a trick. I crossed this floor faster than your eyes can hold, and I chose to close my hand on your wrist instead of your throat, and I chose it in less time than it took you to decide to kill him, because I don't have the gap slowing the choice down anymore. That's the part you can't stand. I'm not faster than you and stupider. I'm faster than you and I'm still choosing. The choosing got faster too." Reth stopped straining. Sethan watched it leave him, the plan, the second blade, the whole architecture of a caste master who had bet his supremacy that a human without a leash would be a beast. He had built his last gambit on the physician's own words, on the addendum that said the room where choice lives, and the girl had just told the dome that the physician had been wrong in his own file, that he had measured the loss of the waiting room and called it the loss of the choosing room because he had never imagined a creature could choose without waiting. Sethan felt the correction land in his own chest like a struck bell. A year of objections. A year of the wrong regret. "Let go of my hand," Reth said. His voice had gone hoarse. "When you let go of the knife," Ren said. The true edge dropped from his fingers and rang on the proving floor, a bright single note under the daylight dome, the same note Vosk's sword had made on the first morning, and the girl opened her hand and stepped back one easy pace and left the duelmaster standing there with his empty hand still raised at the level of a healer's throat, holding nothing, in front of his whole caste and the registry and the record. Sethan's 4 hands were shaking. He made them stop. He looked at his patient, small, grime-collared, entirely unbothered, already losing interest in the duelmaster the way she had lost interest in Vosk, her flat, cold eyes moving past Reth to check, once, that the physician's throat was whole, and he understood that he had just watched the most violent thing he would ever see, and that there was not a mark on anyone, and that the violence had been entirely a matter of what she had decided not to do. "Arbiter," Ren said, without looking at Haylist. She was looking at Sethan's throat, at the thin, bright line the very tip of the edge had drawn on his outer membrane, a scratch, nothing, the only wound on the entire floor. "He drew a real blade on my doctor in front of your instruments. I'd like that in the record too. Not because I'm angry." She finally turned her flat eyes up to the Arbiter. "Because somebody should write down that I had every reason to kill him and the room to do it and the speed to do it, and I closed my hand on his wrist instead. If your files say a human without the delay can't choose, your files are wrong and I just gave you the measurement. Write it down." Nobody in the dome moved for a long time, and Vosk understood that he was standing inside a silence that would outlast him. He had heard many silences in 30 years of the ring. The silence before a strike, the silence after a kill when the crowd decided whether it had been clean. This was neither. This was the silence of a caste watching its master stand on a proving floor with his empty hand still raised at a healer's throat, holding a knife that was on the ground, in front of the coalition and the registry and the record, and finding that there was no version of the moment in which he was not diminished. Reth had drawn a true edge on a non-combatant to save the Sarn's name, and a human had crossed 40 paces to stop him and then let him live, and the mercy was the wound. A kill Reth could have survived. The mercy finished him. Vosk walked out onto the floor. The caste watched him do it and did not know what he intended, and honestly he did not fully know himself. He stopped beside his master, who had at last lowered his empty hand, and he did the thing a champion did when a duel master was no longer fit to lead. He unclasped the caste sign from his own shoulder, the mark of Reth's line, and he let it fall to the floor beside the fallen knife, and the small sound it made was the loudest thing in the dome. "You made us liars," Vosk said, quiet only for Reth, though the dome would read it in the gesture. "The failure I could have carried home, The Caste could have grieved it and been the Caste still. You drew steel on a healer to turn our defeat into her crime, and she refused to let you. She left you alive on purpose so the record would show what you are and what she is. There is no blade that fixes this. You have spent us. He stepped back. I will not carry your sign. Reth said nothing. Whatever a duelmaster was, when the thing beneath it had been shown to the whole coalition, was still standing there in Reth's body, but it did not speak. Two of the Caste came onto the floor and took him by the arms, not gently, and led him off, and the registry's drums turned to follow them out and recorded it, all of it for the file. Vosk turned to the girl. She was watching him with the flat, mild attention he had come to understand was not contempt. He had decided that, somewhere in the second pass, when he had stopped being able to lie to himself, the coldness in her was not looking down on anyone. It was only a person with no wasted motion in her, not even in her face. She had spared his master, and she had spared him, and she had spared 22 blades, and Vosk had spent his whole life in a caste that measured worth by who could not be touched, and he stood now in front of the only creature he had ever met who could not be touched by anyone, and he found that the thing he felt was not shame. It was relief. He did not understand it at first. He examined it the way he examined a fear, to master it, and found that it would not be mastered because it was not a fear. For 30 years he had been the fastest blade of the fastest caste, and every day of it he had known, in the cellar of himself, that the title was a thing he was renting from time, that somewhere a novice was drilling who would one day be faster, that the ring took everyone eventually, that his whole worth hung on a margin of speed that age was already thinning. He had carried that weight so long he had stopped feeling it as weight. And the girl had walked onto his floor and lifted it off him entirely, because she had made the margin meaningless. There was no point racing a novice to be second fastest behind a thing that could not be touched. The whole cruel ladder he had been climbing his entire life had just been shown to lean against nothing. Physician, Vosk said. He did not look away from the girl. Your creature, does it have a name? She has a name, Sethin said, and there was iron under the healer's exhaustion. She is not a creature, duelmaster. She is an enrolled auxiliary of the coalition, and she just saved my life, and you will address her as a person or not at all. Her name is Ren, the girl said before Vosk could answer. You can use it. He's just tired. He's been tired for a year because he thought he broke me. She tilted her head at Vosk, that small motion, and again the fastest blade of the Sarn did not flinch, because he had decided sometime in the last hour to stop pretending he could keep up with her hands and had found, to his surprise, that the pretending had been most of the exhaustion. You dropped your caste sign, she said. That was the first honest thing anybody in your delegation did since you got here. It was the only thing left to do that was honest, Vosk said. No, Ren looked at him steadily. You could have drawn on me. Your master just showed you it wouldn't work, so it would have been a clean way to die in front of your caste with your record intact. Some of them back there are thinking about it right now. She did not glance at the gallery. She did not need to. You didn't. You took off the sign instead. That's harder than dying. I know which one I'd have wanted to do. Vosk was quiet. The dome was quiet. High above, the daylight of the garrisoned world came down through the dome and lit the floor and the dropped knife, and the dropped caste sign, and the small dirt-collared human who had made all of it happen without raising her voice once, and the fastest blade of the Sarn looked at her, and did the last thing his caste would ever have expected of its champion. He knelt. Not in surrender, the Sarn had no gesture of surrender. They died before they made one. But in the older way, the way a duelist knelt to a master he had chosen to learn from, one knee to the floor, blade laid flat across the palms. Then teach me the harder thing, Vosk said. Sethin started to speak, to refuse it, Vosk thought, to put his healer's body between his patient and one more demand from one more Sarn. But Ren lifted one hand a few degrees, and the physician stopped, and she looked down at the kneeling champion for a long moment with those flat, unhurried eyes. I can't teach you to be fast, she said. You can't get where I am. Nobody can without what he did to me, and he shouldn't do it to anybody who doesn't understand what it costs. She crouched down easily so she was level with the kneeling warrior, small in front of the huge plated body of him. But the harder thing isn't the speed. You already know that, or you wouldn't have taken off the sign. The harder thing is choosing not to when you could. You don't need my hands for that. You've had the room for it your whole life. You just filled it with the ring. She stood back up. Go home. Tell your caste the truth. That's the only lesson I've got, and you already started learning it. Vosk knelt on the floor of the proving dome for a moment longer, and then he rose and he took up his blade, and he did not put the caste sign back on. He left it where it lay. Behind him, the registry's drums recorded the empty patch of floor where a champion had knelt to a human and been told to go home and be honest. And Arbiter Halist, at the floor's edge, finally began to write. Halist did not write on the proving floor. It wrote in the registry's own chamber, 3 levels down, and it summoned the physician to watch it do so, which was not a courtesy the registry extended lightly. The chamber was a plain gray room with one long window that held the garrisoned world, and the light came in flat and bright and cool across a table that held nothing but the arbiter's slate. Sethan stood on the far side of it with his 4 hands folded, and the thin scratch on his throat vent still stinging where a true edge had told him how his life would end and then been persuaded otherwise. Halist woke the slate. The word Earth sat at the top of it, and beneath it, still, threshold grade 6, provisional. Sit, physician, you have not slept. I have not slept in a year, Sethan said, but he sat. I want to tell you what I am about to do, Halist said, because you will be the one who has to live inside the consequence, and the registry does not, as a rule, care who lives inside its consequences, and I find that this once I do. It turned the slate so he could see it. The grade of a world is not a measure of how dangerous its people are in a fight. Everyone misunderstands this, including the Sarn, which is why they came here to lose. A threshold grade measures how a species behaves when it discovers it is more dangerous than it was told. That is the only thing the registry has ever actually measured. Strength is common. What a species does with the moment it learns its own strength, that is rare, and that is what we file. Sethan said nothing. He had read the registry's assessments for 40 years, and never once seen this said aloud. A grade 6 species, Halist went on, is one that, upon learning it is stronger than its neighbors, uses the strength. Predictably. It garrisons, it expands, it enrolls its young in the small wars, it becomes a useful and dangerous instrument that the coalition can point. 6 is not an insult. 6 is most of the coalition. The Sarn are a 6. They learned they were fastest, and they built 11 generations of supremacy on it, and they came to this station ready to kill a healer rather than lose the title. That is exactly what a 6 does. The Arbiter's pale eyes rose. I came here prepared to confirm your species at 6. Your auxiliary was, on the instruments, the single most dangerous individual I have ever measured. Every model I hold says a species that produces her and learns what she is becomes the most dangerous instrument in the coalition. 6, provisional, trending worse. And now, Sethan said, and now I have watched her cross 40 paces to keep a killing edge off the throat of the alien who did that to her nerves, and then declined to punish the alien who tried to use her as a weapon against you, and explained to a room full of her betters that she chose all of it, at a speed that gave her every excuse not to choose at all. Halist set the stylus to the slate. That is not a 6. I do not have a number for that. The scale was built by species who assumed that power and restraint trade against each other, that the stronger a thing becomes, the less it can afford to hold back. Your auxiliary has just demonstrated, on my own instruments, a being of absolute power and absolute restraint in the same body, at the same instant, with no gap between them. The scale has no room for it. So I am going to do a thing the registry has done 4 times in its recorded history. It wrote. Sethan watched the word grade dim and a new word take its place, and when he read it the exhaustion of a year moved through him and became something else, something he did not have a name for either. The slate said, Earth threshold ungraded, referred. Ungraded is not off the scale for being harmless, Haylis said. It is off the scale for breaking the scale. It means the registry admits it cannot predict what your species does with power, because your species does a thing the model says is impossible. It grows more careful as it grows more lethal. Referred means the question goes above me, to bodies I do not sit on, and they will argue about your world for a generation. And in the meantime, no delegation in the coalition will be permitted to run a trial on a human again, for any reason, under any terms. The arbiter's flat gaze held his. That is the shield I can give her, physician. It is the only one I have. From today, no one gets to make her prove it. She has proven it into the permanent record, and the record is closed. Sethan sat with it. Outside the long window, the garrisoned world turned its bright face up, indifferent, and somewhere 3 levels up his patient was probably already walking back to the ward to sit in the wrong chair beside her enemy. You are protecting her, he said slowly. I did not expect the registry to protect anyone. I am not protecting her. Haylis darkened the slate. She does not need my protection. That is the entire finding. I am protecting the coalition from what it would do next if I filed her at 6. Do you understand what a 6 coalition does the day it learns a human can be made untouchable? It does not fear her, physician. It covets her. It comes to you, specifically the only being alive who knows how the delay is cut, and it asks how many more it can have, and how fast, and whether the ones who do not consent can be made to. A 6 coalition would empty your ward of every human casualty on those racks and hand them to you with an order. That is what I am filing against. Ungraded and referred means the question is too large for anyone to give that order without an argument that outlives all of us. It buys time. It is the most a clerk can do. The physician looked at his own 4 hands on the plain gray table. And the humans who do consent, he said, freely, understanding what it costs, what does the registry say about them? The registry says nothing yet, Haylis said. That is your question, not mine, and I will tell you honestly that I am glad it is yours and not mine, because I have watched what you made and I do not know the answer, and I am relieved that the answer belongs to the being who lost a year of sleep over the first one. It rose. You cut the delay out of one frightened girl because she asked you to, and because you could not find an honest reason to refuse. You will be asked to do it again. By soldiers, by governments, by your own coalition, dressed as a request and meaning an order. What you decide in that room, physician, matters more than anything that happened on my floor today. The scale I broke this morning can be rebuilt. What your kind of surgeon does with a knife that ends the gap between wanting and doing, that will not be undecided. Sethan stood. The thin scratch on his throat stung. You have given me a great deal to not sleep about, he said. Yes, Haylis said, without unkindness. That is also rare, in my experience, and worth filing. Most beings who are handed a knife like yours sleep very well. Go and see your patient, physician. And when the requests come, and they will come before the season turns, remember that the girl who broke my scale did it by declining to do the thing everyone was certain she would do. There may be a lesson in that for the man who taught her hands to move. The requests came before the season turned, exactly as Haylis had said, and the first of them wore the gray and copper of the coalition's enrollment directorate and called itself Commissioner Asan. Asan was a cephalopod of the deep station kind, mottled gray skin that flushed and paled with the current of its thoughts, 4 thick manipulator limbs folded into the sleeves of a uniform tailored to hide how many of them there were. It had come to Sur Station 11 days after the trial with a portable file drum, and a mandate signed at a level of the directorate that did not, as a rule, sign anything a physician could refuse. It found Sethan in the surgical annex and did not sit, because the directorate had taught it that a being who remained standing controlled the room. Physician Adept Sethan, Asan said. Its skin held a courteous, even pallor, the color the directorate trained its officers to wear. I will not waste your time with the pleasantries, because I have read your file and I know you dislike them. The coalition has a proposal, and the proposal is generous, and I would like you to hear all of it before you decide you are offended by it. I am already offended by it, Sethan said, and I have not heard any of it. But sit down, Commissioner. I dislike being loomed at more than I dislike pleasantries. Asan sat. A flush of surprise moved across its skin, and it mastered it. The auxiliary Savile, it began. The procedure you performed on her. The Directorate has reviewed the trial record. The entire coalition has reviewed the trial record. There is very little else being discussed at my level, and the Directorate has reached the conclusion that any reasonable body would reach. What you did to one human, you can do to others. The coalition fights small wars on a great many borders, physician, and it fights them with enrolled auxiliaries, and it loses a great many of them, and it has just watched one human make 22 sarn blades meaningless without lifting a hand in anger. You understand the arithmetic. I do not have to draw it for you. Draw it for me anyway, Sethan said. I want to hear you say it out loud. Asan's skin rippled annoyance, quickly smoothed. A company of them, it said. A single company of auxiliaries with the delay removed would end border wars before they began, not by killing. That is the elegance of it, physician, and I want you to hear that I understand the elegance. Your auxiliary did not kill anyone. A company that cannot be touched does not need to kill. It ends engagements by making them pointless. Few are dead on every side, including the enemies. The Directorate is not asking you to build monsters. The Directorate is asking you to build the most humane instrument of war the coalition has ever fielded. And it is prepared to give you a ward the size of this station to do it in, and every human casualty in coalition space, and a rank that would let you loom at commissioners instead of the other way round. It was, Sethan admitted to himself, a good offer. It was better than he had braced for. Asan had not come with threats. It had come with the genuinely seductive shape of a mercy, fewer dead, cleaner wars, and the physician understood that this was precisely why it was the most dangerous request he would ever be handed. A threat he could refuse cleanly. A mercy was harder. You have read my file, Sethan said. Then you have read the addendum I filed against my own procedure on the 11th day. Have you read that one, Commissioner, or only the parts of the file that helped you make your offer? I have read all of it. Then quote it to me, the line about consent. Asan's skin paled a shade. It did not want to. The throttle can be removed, it recited flatly. I believe it should not be by me or anyone without the subject's full understanding of what she would become. Full understanding of what she would become, Sethan repeated. Do you know what she became, Commissioner? Not on the instruments. I have all the instrument data. It is not the thing that matters. Let me tell you what I actually took out of Ren Savile, because I did not understand it myself until she explained it to me 11 days ago, in a chair she was not supposed to be sitting in. He leaned forward, all four hands flat on the table. I took out the room where she waited. Not the room where she chose. I thought it was the same room for a year. And I was wrong, and a conquered arbiter had to watch her prove me wrong on a proving floor before I understood it. The delay is 2 rooms built into one. In the first room, a creature waits to find out whether the thing coming at it will hurt. That is where fear lives. In the second room, a creature decides what to do about it. That is where mercy lives. I took out the waiting room. The choosing room, it turns out, does not need the waiting room to function, but only in a being who had already built the choosing room strong over a whole life before I ever opened her skull. Asan was very still now. Its skin had gone the neutral gray of an officer listening past its own script. Ren Savile spent 19 years afraid, Sethan said. Afraid in the waiting room every day, a beat behind her own hands, and she filled the choosing room while she waited with who she decided to be, with the enemy she decided to sit beside, with the mercy she decided to keep. By the time she asked me to cut the delay, the choosing room was the strongest thing in her, strong enough to work with no waiting room at all. That is why she is what she is, and not the monster the Sarn bet on. Now he sat back. Bring me a company of soldiers, Commissioner. Bring me the human casualties off the racks. How many of them do you think have spent 19 years building a choosing room strong enough to run with no waiting room to slow it down? How many have decided who they are so thoroughly that they could keep the Mercy at a speed no eye can follow? Some. A few. And the rest I would be handing an ungoverned reflex with a half-built choosing room, and I would be doing it on the Directorate's schedule in quantity to make your wars cleaner. Do you know what that is, Commissioner? Tell me, Asan said quietly. That is a company of the exact monster the Sarn thought they were fighting, Sethin said. And I would have made them, not the coalition, me. With these hands, because you drew the arithmetic and it was good arithmetic and fewer people would die. He shook his head, slow, the meridic gesture of a door closing. The answer is no, Commissioner. Not never. Ren asked me freely, understanding the cost, and I would not tell another human who understood the cost that they may not choose their own nerves, but not a company, not on a schedule. Not in quantity and not for war, and not one single subject who has not sat where she sat and understood what I would be taking and what I would be leaving. One at a time, freely, or not at all. Asan's skin held its neutral gray for a long moment. Then slowly, a color moved across it that the Directorate did not train its officers to wear, and Sethin, who had spent 40 years reading the bodies of 100 species, recognized it, because it was the same color the tray had not spilled in recognition, and under it, the first cold draft of a much larger fear than the one the Commissioner had walked in carrying. You should know, Asan said, and now the courtesy was gone from its skin, that I did not come to Sur Station to be refused. The mandate I carry does not have a place on it for a physician's conscience. It has a place for a signature, and the signature is a formality, because the human casualties on your racks are enrolled auxiliaries, and enrolled auxiliaries are the coalitions to assign, and the coalition has assigned them to a program that begins with your procedure. Your consent is preferred, physician. It is not required. If you will not perform the procedure, the Directorate will find a surgeon who will, and that surgeon will not have written an addendum about choosing rooms, and I think you know that the second best surgeon in coalition space is a great deal worse than the best. There it was. Sethin had known it was in the drum somewhere, under the good arithmetic. A mercy on the surface and an order underneath, and the order did not care about consent at all, not his. And not the frightened casualties on the racks who had never asked to have their oldest safety cut out on a Directorate schedule by a surgeon chosen for compliance. You would give my patients to a butcher, Sethin said, to make them into a company you can point at a border. I would give the coalition an instrument that ends wars without killing, Asan said. You keep hearing the word butcher. I keep saying the word fewer. We are not going to agree on the vocabulary, physician, so let us agree on the procedure instead. You will begin with the auxiliary Savills cohort, the human casualties who came in on her racks. There are 31 still in your ward. The Directorate has them scheduled. You may perform the procedures yourself, with your conscience and your choosing rooms and your one at a time, or you may refuse and watch a compliant surgeon do it faster and worse. Those are the terms. I did not write them. I am only the one who says them out loud. No, said a voice from the doorway, you're not. Sethin had not heard the door. Neither had Asan. The Commissioner came half out of its chair, 4 manipulator limbs flaring from its sleeves before it caught itself, because a deep station cephalopod did not like a thing arriving behind it unheard, and Ren Saville had arrived behind it unheard. She stood in the annex doorway in her gray patient's tunic with her boots in one hand, having walked the corridor barefoot the way she did now, because shoes, she had told Sethin once, were one more thing between her and the floor telling her where everyone was. There was ward grime on her collar and a fresh scuff on one cheekbone, and she looked, as she always looked, like the least dangerous thing in any room she entered. "You're the one who wrote them," Ren said to the commissioner. "You said the mandate signs at a level that doesn't have room for a conscience. That's a thing people say when the conscience is theirs, and they've decided to file it somewhere they won't have to look at it. I've done it. Everybody in that ward has done it. It's the same move every time." She came into the room, unhurried, and set her boots down on the end of the table, and Asan's skin cycled through 3 colors trying to decide how afraid to be of a barefoot girl with her boots in her hand. 31 of my cohort. You've got them scheduled." "They are enrolled auxiliaries," Asan said. The words came steady, but its skin did not. "The coalition may assign." "I heard the part where you can order it," Ren said. "I'm not arguing the order. Orders are real. You've got the authority to send 31 scared kids to a compliance surgeon who will cut the waiting room out of them without ever telling them there were 2 rooms in there. I believe you. That's not the part you should be thinking about." She pulled out the chair across from the commissioner and sat, easily, so she was level with it, small and mild and close. "The part you should be thinking about is that 31 of my cohort came off the same border I did. Same 3 days. Same racks. They sat in the same gap I sat in, too slow and scared to death. And then the doctor put them back together, and they woke up in a ward, and the first person who came and sat with every one of them, because I couldn't stand that they were waking up alone among strangers who'd shot at them, was me." Asan went very still. "They know me," Ren said. "They trust me. Whatever the doctor gives them or doesn't, whoever you send, at some point every one of those 31 is going to look across the ward at the one person who's already been through it, to find out from her whether it was worth it. That's me too." She tilted her head, the small motion, and the commissioner flinched from a barefoot girl the way the champion of the Sarn had flinched, and for the same reason. "I'm not threatening you, Commissioner. I want to be really clear because you're about to file this wrong. I haven't moved. I'm sitting in a chair with my boots off. I'm just telling you a fact your mandate left out. You can order 31 procedures. You cannot order 31 soldiers to come out of them believing you did it for their sake. Only I can do that, and I'm not going to because you didn't come here to help them. You came here to point them, and they'll know. Scared kids always know who's pointing them. I spent 19 years being pointed." "You are describing," Asan said slowly, "a company that would be given to me untouchable, ungovernable, and loyal to you." "I'm describing a company that wouldn't be loyal to you," Ren said. "That's the whole thing. You keep hearing threat. I keep saying no. The doctor's right, you and I aren't going to agree on the vocabulary." She stood back up and picked up her boots, and the commissioner tracked the motion of her hands the way a creature tracks the thing it has decided is the most dangerous object in the room. "Arbiter Halist filed my world as ungraded and referred. You know what that means better than I do. It means nobody gets to run a trial on a human, and nobody gets to make a program out of one, until a body that outranks your whole directorate finishes an argument that's going to last longer than you'll hold that rank. That shield's already up. You came here 11 days too late to make 31 kids into your instrument, and I think, under all the copper, you already know that, and that's why your skin keeps trying to be a color they didn't train you to wear." Asan looked at her for a long moment. Its skin had settled at last into a single steady gray, not the trained neutral of an officer, but the honest flat gray of a creature that has finished a calculation and does not like the answer. It rose. It gathered its file drum with 2 limbs and kept the other 2 where it could see them. An old deep station habit it did not bother to hide anymore. "I will file that the procedure cannot be scaled," Asan said. "It will not be a popular file. There will be others after me who read it and decide I was weak, and they will come and they will bring better arithmetic than mine." It looked from the girl to the physician. "I am telling you this because it is true, and because I find, standing in this room, that I would rather you were ready for them than that I saved face with my directorate. That is not a color they trained me to wear either." It paused at the door. "You spared the Sarn duelmaster to put a fact in the record. What fact do you want me to put in mine? Wren considered it, boots in hand, barefoot on the cold floor of the annex. That we're not for pointing, she said. That's all. Write down that the doctor can make a human nobody can touch, and the first thing she did with it was refuse to be aimed. Some of the ones who come after you will read that and understand it. The rest were always going to come anyway, but write it down. Tomas Reyes had been awake in the ward for 6 days when the sunward wall tried to kill everyone in it, and afterward he could never make the others believe what he had seen, because the others had all been looking at the wall. He was one of the 31. Same border, same 3 days, same racks. He had a rebuilt hip and a chest the meritic bonework was still knitting, and he spent his waking hours the way the cohort all did, watching the wall of tall filtered windows hold the bright green world below and trying not to think about the surgeon 3 levels down who could, they had all heard by now, cut something out of your nerves and make you into the girl from the trial. Half the ward wanted it. Half the ward was terrified of it. Nobody said either out loud. And the girl from the trial sat in the ward every day, in a chair by the enemy's bed, barefoot, and did not act like the most dangerous person in the coalition, and that unsettled the cohort more than if she had. The wall failed at midday. Tomas would remember that it made almost no sound. A station that size did not announce its own wounds. There was a cough somewhere deep in the sunward structure, and then a seam in the great window wall opened a hand's length with a shriek of escaping air, and the bright cool light of the world below was suddenly a howling gray line dragging everything in the ward toward it. Loose bedding went first, then a supply cart, tumbling. Then the alien orderly who had been standing nearest the wall, a slight 4-armed meritic junior, snatched off its feet and thrown at the widening seam like a leaf at a drain. Tomas saw the girl already moving. That was the thing he could never make them believe. The seam had not finished opening. The orderly was still in the air, not yet at the gap. The alarm only now beginning to climb the walls, and Wren Saville was already out of her chair and across the ward, not running the way a person runs, arriving the way a thought arrives, and she caught the thrown orderly by one of its 4 wrists with one hand and caught the frame of a bolted bed with the other, and simply stopped, an anchor grown out of the floor, the way the whole coalition had heard she could stop a Sarn's blade. The orderly hung from her grip over the howling gray line, 4 limbs flailing, and did not go into it, because her hand said it would not, and her hand did not negotiate. She did not stop there. That was the second thing. She had the orderly, and the orderly was safe, and any ordinary rescue would have ended with holding on and shouting for help. Wren looked once at the widening seam, and once at the bolted bed she was anchored to, and Tomas watched her do arithmetic he could not follow. And then she swung the caught orderly, gently, in an arc that set it down against the far bed out of the wind, released it, and in the same motion that no eye in the ward could hold she took up the tumbling supply cart out of the air, turned it, and drove it edge first into the widening seam. The cart was steel and the seam was a station's mortal wound, and the cart should have folded into it and been swallowed. It did not fold because she did not let it. She held the cart in the gap with both hands and her whole small body braced against the bolted bed and the howling gray line, and she held the station's wound shut with a supply cart and her arms for the 11 seconds. It took the emergency bulkhead to grind down out of the ceiling and seal the sunward wall behind her. And when the bulkhead met the floor she let go of the cart and stepped back, and the wind stopped, and the ward was full of scattered bedding and gasping soldiers, and one 4-armed orderly sitting stunned against a bed with all 4 hands pressed to its own chest. Nobody said anything. Tomas's ears rang in the sudden quiet. Wren stood in the middle of the wrecked ward barefoot, her gray tunic torn along one shoulder where the wind had caught it, a fresh scrape on the arm that had held the cart the only mark on her, and she looked around the ward once, counting, the flat cold count of a person making sure the arithmetic had come out whole. 31 of the cohort. The orderly. The enemy in its bed, wide awake now, staring. All accounted for. All alive. "Everybody's fine," she said to the ward in the same voice she said everything. "Bulkhead sealed. They'll fix the wall. Somebody get the orderly some water. It's had a bad minute." And she went and picked up her chair, which had tumbled halfway across the ward, and carried it back to the enemy's bed, and sat down in it. And the whole ward watched a barefoot girl who had just held a station's wound shut with her arms sit back down beside a sleeping Ale as though nothing had happened, because to her nothing had. She had done arithmetic, and the arithmetic had come out whole, and there was no more to feel about it than that. That was when Tomas understood what the trial record had not told him, what the whole coalition arguing 3 levels up had missed. He had been afraid of the procedure because he had thought it would make him into a weapon, the girl from the trial, the thing that made Sarn blades meaningless. He had watched the wall try to kill everyone, and he had watched the most dangerous person in the coalition spend her impossible speed, all of it, on catching an orderly and holding a wall, and he understood that the speed was not the point, and had never been the point. The point was what you had already decided to do with your hands before anyone put a wall or a blade in front of them. She had decided a long time ago. The surgeon had only made her fast enough to keep every promise at once. The Meridic Junior recovered its breath and its dignity and came, unsteadily, to stand in front of Ren's chair. It did not have the words, a junior orderly, barely out of training, in front of the being the whole station was afraid of. It made the meridic gesture of a debt acknowledged, all 4 hands crossed and held it. "You're welcome," Ren said before it could struggle through anything worse. "Sit down before you fall down, and tell the doctor the sunward wall's been lying to his instruments. I felt it going for 2 days. Floor was wrong under that whole stretch." She turned back to the Ale, who was still staring at her, awake and afraid and amazed, and she said something low to it in the handful of Ale words she had taught herself over 3 weeks of sitting, and the enemy stopped being afraid. Down the ward, Tomas Reyes lay back on his rebuilt chest and looked at the ceiling and made his decision, the one the whole cohort had been not saying for 6 days. It was not the decision the directorate would have wanted, and it was not the decision the terrified half of the ward would have predicted. He decided that, whatever the surgeon 3 levels down did or did not do to his nerves, he wanted to spend the rest of whatever he was going to be the way she spent it. And that this was a thing you had to decide first, in the choosing room, before anyone touched you, and that he had 6 days and a wrecked ward and a barefoot girl to thank for finally deciding it. Tomas Reyes asked on the 9th day, and the way Sethin handled the asking was the thing that finally let the physician sleep. The boy came to the annex on his own feet, which was itself a small victory of the bonework, and he stood in the door the way the young stood indoors when they had rehearsed a thing, and were watching it come apart in their mouths. Sethin let him get through it. Ren was there. Ren was always somewhere near now, barefoot. A chair pulled into a corner, present in the low way she was present, and Sethin had stopped asking her to leave his annex because her being there changed the asking in a way he had come to trust. "I want it," Tomas said when he had finished the rehearsed part and arrived at the true one. "The procedure, the delay, I've thought about it. I watched her hold the wall. I want it." Sethin did not say yes and did not say no. He had learned, over a year and a broken scale and a commissioner's copper skin, that the whole thing lived in the space between those 2 words. He gestured the boy into the chair across the table. The same chair the commissioner had sat in, the same chair a duelmaster's arithmetic had been refused across, and he folded his 4 hands and looked at Tomas Reyes the way he had once looked into an open skull and found the longest leash in the coalition. "Tell me what you think I would take out of you," Sethin said. "The delay," Tomas said. "The lag, the thing that makes us slow." "That is what everyone thinks. Ren thought it too for a while." Sethin nodded toward the corner. "Ask her what I actually take out. She is the only person alive who knows from the inside." Tomas turned. Ren did not get up from her corner. "2 rooms," she said. "There's a room where you wait to find out if the thing coming at you is going to hurt. He takes that one out. And there's a room where you decide what to do about it. He leaves that one. He can't reach it. It's not in the nerves. The trouble is the second room only works without the first one if you already built it strong, and you build it in the waiting room, so. She looked at the boy steadily. He can't give you a strong choosing room, Tomas. He can only take away the place you'd have built it if you haven't built it yet. And you're 20. How strong do you think your choosing room is? The boy was quiet. Sethan watched him not answer, and watched him understand that not answering was the honest answer, and thought, this is the whole thing. This is what the directorate wanted to do to 31 at once on a schedule. I don't know, Tomas said finally. Good, Sethan said. That is the first true thing you have said since you came in. A being who was certain his choosing room was strong enough would be the one I would refuse fastest, because certainty at your age is just a waiting room you have not noticed yet. He leaned forward. I am not going to cut your delay, Tomas Reyes. Not today and not this year. Not because you are unworthy, because you are 20, and you have had 6 days awake after a war that nearly killed you, and the choosing room you have is the one that war built in a hurry, and it is not finished. If I take your waiting room now, you will run the rest of your life on a choosing room that stopped building at 20 in a hurry in fear. You would not become her. He tipped his head at Ren. You would become the thing the Sarn thought she was, not because your speed would be wrong, because your choosing would be young. Then when, Tomas said. There was no anger in it. That was the border war in him, Sethan thought. The young ones who had been in the gap did not get angry the way the untested young got angry. When would it be strong enough? I do not know, Sethan said. That is the honest answer, and it is the only one I have. Perhaps in 10 years, when you have decided who you are so many times that the deciding has worn a deep channel. Perhaps never, most people never build a choosing room strong enough to run with no waiting room, and that is not a failure, it is simply most people. Perhaps the day comes when you are 40 and steady and certain of yourself in the quiet way and not the young way, and you sit in that chair and I look at you and I can see that the room is finished. On that day I will ask you what she asked me. Do you understand what I would take and what I would leave? And if you do, I will do it freely, one man understanding the cost, not before. He sat back. You came in wanting to be fast. Go and spend the next 10 years becoming someone worth making fast. That is the only path to it I will open, and it is a slower path than the directorate wanted, and that slowness is the entire point. Tomas Reyes sat with it. He was young, and he had wanted the thing the way the young want things, whole and now, and Sethan watched the boy do the hard work of hearing no, and understanding that it was not a rejection but a map. He had braced for the boy to argue. The boy did not argue. He had been in the gap for 3 days on a border. He knew what it was to want your hands to be faster than your fear, and he was, Sethan saw, exactly clear-eyed enough to understand that a healer refusing to make him fast today was the first person in this whole affair who had treated his nerves as his own, and not a resource. Okay, Tomas said. He stood slowly on the rebuilt hip. 10 years. Or never, Sethan said. And never is also a whole life and a good one, and I want you to hear that from me as clearly as the 10 years. You do not have to become untouchable to have been worth saving. I would have rebuilt your hip whether or not you ever sat in that chair. The knife that ends the gap is not the prize at the end of healing. The healing was the prize. The knife is only for the very few who have already become the kind of person it would be safe to hand it to. When the boy had gone, Ren came out of her corner and sat in the chair he had left, barefoot, and looked at the physician across the table for a while. You just slept, she said. I have not slept in a year. No, just now. Something in you slept right at the end when you told him the healing was the prize. She almost smiled. The closest Sethan had seen her come to it there and gone faster than a Sarn could have caught. You've been carrying me around for a year like a mistake you made with your hands. You just figured out I wasn't a mistake. You figured out you'd do it again if the right person asked, understanding the cost, one at a time forever and never for a company and never for a war. That's not a man who broke something. That's a man who knows what his knife is for. She stood back up. Go to sleep, doctor. A real one. The walls fixed, the cast went home, the commissioner filed its no. Nobody's coming today. Sleep. Sethan did not sleep at his table like a collapsing man. But that night, for the first time since the 9th day of the worst year of his 40, the physician-adept Sethan lay down in his own quarters under the light of the garrisoned world and closed the 3 vents along his throat and rested, and did not dream of open skulls, and woke without the weight. Vosk came back to Sur Station 40 days after he had left his caste sign on the proving floor, and he came alone, and he came without a blade, which for a Sarn of the dual caste was a thing close to arriving without skin. He found the human where the whole station now knew to find her, in the long ward, in the wrong chair, in the flat bright light of the world below. He had rehearsed what he would say on the whole crossing. He said none of it. He stopped a respectful distance off and stood there, huge and plated and unarmed, and Wren looked up at him and did not seem surprised, because she was never surprised, because surprise lived in a waiting room she no longer had. "You went home," she said. "You told them the truth." "I told them the truth," Vosk said. "It went as you would expect, worse in some quarters. There are lines of the caste that would rather have had a war with your coalition than a finding on a slate." His crest shifted, the Sarn shrug. "But I am not here to bring you the caste's anger. I am here to bring you its decision, because you are the reason for it, and it seemed dishonest to make the decision about you without your face in front of me when I said it." "Sit down first," Wren said. "You're doing the looming thing. He hates the looming thing." She nodded at Sethan, who had come down the ward at the sight of a Sarn and stood now with his 4 hands carefully still, and Vosk understood that the healer would never fully stop expecting a blade from him, and that this was fair. Vosk sat, folding himself onto the floor beside the chair, because there was no seat in the ward built for a Sarn, and the sitting put his plated head nearly level with the small human's, and something in the ward eased at the sight of the fastest blade of the coalition sitting on the floor at a barefoot girl's feet to deliver a decision. "The caste has renounced the record," Vosk said. Sethan made a small sound. Wren did not. "For 11 generations," Vosk went on, "the Sarn have held the coalition's mark for speed. It was verified in 9,000 bouts. It was the load-bearing wall of what we are. And on your floor I watched it come away from the foundation, and I understood, kneeling there, that the wall had always been leaning against nothing, that a mark for being fastest is a mark you are only renting from time, and time takes it from everyone, and we had built 11 generations of pride on a debt we could never stop paying." His amber eyes held hers. "So the caste has done the thing I could not have imagined a Sarn doing before I met you. It has asked the registry to strike the record. Not to award it elsewhere, to end it. There will be no fastest caste in the coalition anymore. There will only be duelists, who are good at a thing, and who will die when a better one comes, and who will stop pretending that the dying is a kind of shame." "That's the harder thing," Wren said quietly. "That is the harder thing," Vosk agreed. "You told me I already knew how to do it and had only filled the room with the ring. I went home and I emptied the room. It was the worst 40 days of my life, and I would not undo one of them." He was silent a moment. "The young ones do not understand it yet. They think we have surrendered something. In a generation they will understand that we set down a weight we had carried so long we called it a spine. That is your doing, human. You made 22 blades meaningless without lifting a hand in anger, and then you made a caste of warriors lighter than it had been in 11 generations. And you did both of them the same way. By refusing to spend what you had on the thing everyone was certain you would spend it on." Wren looked at the huge, unarmed warrior sitting on the floor of a hospital ward, and for a long moment she did not say anything, and Sethan watched his patient do a thing he had almost never seen her do, take her time, on purpose, in a body that had no need to. "You came without a blade," she said. "I will not carry one into a room where you are," Vosk said, "not from fear. I have made my peace with the fact that you could end me in less time than it takes to regret it, and I find, strangely, that the peace is the lightest thing I own. I come without a blade because a blade in this room would be a lie. The way the cap was a lie, and the record was a lie. You are the one being in the coalition I could never touch, and I have decided that instead of grieving it, I will let it teach me. A Sarn who cannot win learns to do something other than win. My caste forgot that 11 generations ago. You reminded us. I did not come to be forgiven. I came to say thank you, which is a word my caste does not have, so I have had to borrow yours. You're welcome, Ren said. Same as I told the orderly. And then, because she was who she was and the cold in her was never cruelty, she added, stay a few days. There's a kid here named Tomas who thinks being fast is the point. He'd learn more from watching a Sarn who gave up the record than from anything I could tell him. Sit with him. Tell him about the 40 days. That's teaching the harder thing, and you're better at it than you think because you just did it. Vosk stayed 9 days. Sethin watched it happen and filed none of it, because some things did not belong in the record. The fastest blade of a caste that no longer kept a record sitting on the floor of a ward, telling a 20-year-old human what it cost to set down a weight you had called a spine, and the 20-year-old listening, and the barefoot girl in the wrong chair pretending not to, and the enemy in the bed learning a little more of the human's handful of ale words each day, and the flat bright light of the garrisoned world coming down over all of them, indifferent and warm anyway. The ale the ward called Vesh took its first steps in the season the sunward wall was rebuilt, and it took them toward the human who had shot at it, because she was the one holding out her hands. Vesh had spent a long time deciding whether to hate her. This was the thing the coalition did not understand about the ale, who were a patient people, a people of long deciding. They did not hate quickly, and so their hatred, when it came, was a considered thing, load-bearing, meant to last. Vesh had woken in a coalition ward with its lower limbs dead, and its border lost, and every reason a considered people needed to build a hatred that would outlive the healing. It had the material. 3 days of shellfire, a company of human auxiliaries on the far side of it, and this one among them, this small one now sitting by its bed every day. Vesh had begun to build the hatred the way its people built everything, slowly, carefully, meaning it to hold weight. It had not been able to finish it. The trouble was that the human kept arriving. Not with speeches. Vesh learned later she could not have made a speech in ale if she had wanted to. She had a handful of words, badly shaped, learned off a translator drum in the dark. She arrived with water. She arrived and sat and did nothing much and let the ward be a little less full of strangers. And a considered people, building a considered hatred, requires the object of the hatred to hold still and be hateful, and the human would not hold still and be hateful. She kept being a tired girl who sat with the enemy because she had said once, in her handful of broken words, you were in the gap too, and Vesh had not understood the phrase for weeks, and then had understood it all at once, and had not been able to lay another stone on the hatred after that. Because Vesh had been in the gap, 3 days of it. Too slow, too afraid, a considered people's mind moving at its careful pace, while the fast, bright violence of the border came down, and the terror of it had not been the dying. The ale did not fear dying the way the fast peoples did. The terror had been the helplessness, the long deciding pace of its own body while everything demanded speed. And the human had lived in that same gap, on the other side of the same 3 days, and had come out of it and been given a way out of the gap entirely by the gray four-armed healer. And the first thing she had done with her freedom from the gap was sit down beside the one enemy who had shared it with her and bring it water. You could not hate that. Vesh had tried. A considered people knew when a thing would not hold weight, and the hatred would not hold weight, and Vesh had set it down, stone by stone, over 3 weeks, and put in its place a thing it did not have a good word for, and the humans apparently called, badly, being in the gap together. So when the day came that the meritic bonework had finished its slow work, and the healer said the lower limbs would bear weight again, Vesh did not want the healer's 4 steady hands for the first steps. It wanted hers. It said so. In the ward's rough shared Pigeon and Sethin, who had grown the limbs and had every professional right to be the one who tested them, stepped back without a word, because the healer had learned this year, when a thing was not about him. Ren stood up out of the wrong chair and set her boots aside and came and held out her hands, and Vesh took them, and the human's grip was the strangest thing the ale had ever felt, small and light, and utterly without strain, a grip that could have crushed the bones of its manipulators, and instead simply offered exactly as much support as Vesh needed, and not one measure more, adjusting faster than Vesh could shift its weight, so that whichever way it started to fall her hands were already there. Not catching, just present, the way she was present in everything. Vesh understood, holding those hands, a fraction of what the Sarn had understood on the floor. It was not that she was strong, it was that she arrived. Wherever you were about to fall, she was already there, having decided in advance to hold you up. Vesh put its weight on the new limbs. They held. It took one step toward her, because she was backing away a pace to draw it forward, the oldest teaching there was. It took another. The ward had gone quiet, 31 of the human cohort and the Meridic juniors, and Vosk on the floor in his 9th day, all watching an ale walk toward a human across a hospital ward with its dead boarder and its abandoned hatred behind it. "That's it," Ren said in her handful of broken ale, backing away another step, hands out. "Come on, you've got it. You were always going to get it. Come on." Vesh crossed the ward to her on limbs a healer had grown and a human had steadied, and when it reached her, it did not let go of her hands, and she did not make it, and the two of them stood there in the flat, bright light of the world below, the human who had shot at it and the enemy who could not finish hating her, holding on, and Sethin turned his face away and pretended to check an instrument, because a physician of 40 years was allowed a moment of not being watched. "I decided a thing," Vesh said in careful ale, and the translator drum in Ren's collar caught it and turned it small and flat into the human tongue. "My people build hatreds to last. I built one for you. It would not hold weight. So I have built the other thing instead, the thing you have no better word for than the gap, and I have built it the way my people build to last." It tightened its grip on her small hands. "You will have one ale who does not forget this ward as long as it lives, and my people are long-lived, and we are patient, and we do not set down a debt any faster than we set down a hatred. Whatever your world becomes, human, whatever number they finally give it, or refuse to, there is a border out there that will remember that the deadliest thing the Coalition ever measured spent its first free season teaching an enemy to walk." Ren looked up at the ale she had decided to keep, and she did not say "you're welcome," because some things were too large for the words she gave the orderly and the Sarn, and instead she just held on a moment longer, and then she said, in her broken, careful ale, the longest sentence she had, the one she had been practicing on the translator drum in the dark for weeks against exactly this day. Nobody else in the ward could parse it. The translator drum, worn and small, turned it into the human tongue only for the two of them, and Sethin, 3 paces off with his face turned to an instrument, caught only the shape of it and did not need the rest. It was, "We were both too slow once. Neither of us is slow now. Let's not spend it the way they wanted us to." In the years after, the ward became a place people came to be told no. That was not how the Coalition described it. The Coalition, at the levels where Earth's file sat ungraded and referred and argued over by bodies that would not finish arguing in Sethin's lifetime, described the Circe reclamation wards as a restricted medical facility under registry protection, and posted the language of restriction on its doors, and the language did its work. But the beings who came, and they came, the way Asan had promised they would come, more of them each year, did not come for restriction. They came for the knife that ended the gap, and they left having been told no, and the ward earned its quiet legend one refusal at a time. Sethin refused most of them himself. He grew good at it the way he had grown good at surgery, which was to say he never grew comfortable with it, and never let the discomfort make his hand unsteady. Governments sent officers with better arithmetic than Asan's, and he told them about the 2 rooms and sent them home. Fleet captains came with volunteers already selected, hard veterans certain of themselves, and he looked into the certainty and found the young waiting room hiding under it and refused them. And some of them understood, and some of them left cursing his conscience, and he filed neither the understanding nor the curses. A being learned, sitting across that table year after year, that the number of people who had built a choosing room strong enough to run with no waiting room at all was very small, and that most of the ones certain they had done it were the surest sign they had not, and that the work of the ward was not making humans untouchable. The work of the ward was telling the truth to people who had come a long way to hear a yes. He said yes 4 times in 11 years. He did not keep the 4 as a record. Records were how the Sarn had trapped themselves, and Halist had broken a scale to keep Ren out of one, and Sethin had learned the lesson. But he carried the 4 in himself, the way he carried the scratch on his throat vent that had never fully faded. A retired border medic of 60 who had spent 40 years deciding, over and over, who she was, and had worn the channel so deep that the waiting room was already almost empty before he ever touched her. A conscientious objector from a penal world who had refused, under torture, to spend himself the way his keepers wanted, and had thereby built a choosing room stronger than any soldier's. 2 others, each of them the kind of person you could hand the end of the gap to and trust the choosing to hold. And Tomas Reyes, who came back in the 10th year, 40 now where he had been 20, steady in the quiet way and not the young way, and sat in the chair and said, "I think it's finished, doctor, and I think you'll be able to see that it is." And Sethin had looked at him and seen that it was, and had done it freely, one man understanding the cost. And Tomas had walked out of the annex not the thing the Sarn had feared, but a slower, kinder version of the girl who had held a wall. Because he had spent 10 years becoming someone worth making fast. Ren stayed. That surprised the coalition, which had assumed the deadliest thing it had ever measured would want a border, a command, a war worthy of her. She wanted the wrong chair. She stayed at Sur Station, and did the thing the ward could not have done without her. She sat with the ones who came, and she told them the truth Sethin could not tell them, because she was the only one who knew it from the inside. She told the certain ones what it was to lose the waiting room. She told the frightened ones that the fear had lived in the gap, and the gap could go, and the person would remain. She told the ones Sethin refused why the no was a gift, and she told them in the flat, cold voice that never rose, and they believed her because she had no reason to lie and every reason to know. The ward's legend was Sethin's refusals, but the ward's mercy was hers. She had found in a chair by an enemy's bed the only border she wanted, the narrow one between a person and the knife that would end the gap, and she stood on it for 11 years and let almost no one cross, and the almost no one was the whole point. The argument about Earth never finished. Somewhere above Halist, and above the bodies above Halist, the coalition went on failing to agree on what to do with a species that grew more careful as it grew more lethal, and the failure was, Sethin came to understand, the best outcome available, because every year the argument stayed open was a year no one gave the order to empty his ward. Ungraded and referred was not a verdict. It was a held breath, and the coalition held it, and in the held breath a handful of humans became slowly, freely, one at a time, the most dangerous and most careful beings the galaxy had ever failed to classify, and the galaxy could not decide whether that was salvation or the slow beginning of its end, and neither could Sethin, and he had made his peace with not deciding, the way Vosk had made his peace with the record. The Sarn sent word, now and then. The caste that no longer kept a record had become, in the years since it renounced the fastest mark, a strange new thing among the coalition's warriors, duelists who taught restraint, who came to the small wars not to be fastest, but to end engagements the way the human had ended the trial, by making them pointless. It did not always work. The old borders still bled, but there were 3 engagements in 11 years that ended with no dead on either side because a Sarn duelist had learned the harder thing from a human who had learned it in a gap, and Sethin filed those 3 nowhere and kept them 2. And Vesh walked. The ale went home to its long-lived, patient people with its grown limbs and its abandoned hatred and its debt it would not set down, and it told them, in the careful deciding pace of the ale, what it had seen, that the deadliest measured thing in the coalition had spent its first free season teaching an enemy to walk, and that a border was not worth a hatred a people could not, on examination, make hold weight. The ale were patient. The border stayed quiet. Sethin did not live to see whether it stayed quiet forever, but it stayed quiet longer than any treaty had held it, and it stayed quiet because of a handful of broken words a girl had practiced in the dark against the day an enemy would take its first steps. None of it was in a record. Sethin had come, at the end of the worst year of his 40 and the 11 quieter years after it, to distrust records the way a burned being distrusts fire. The record was where the Sarn had trapped themselves, and where the Directorate had tried to trap 31 frightened kids, and where a scale had once been ready to file a whole species at 6 and point it. The true things had all happened in the space the records left out: the chair by the bed, the wall held shut, the Caste sign on the floor, the enemy's first steps, the 4 times in 11 years he had said yes. He had spent his youth believing a physician's work was what the instruments could measure. He spent his age understanding that the instruments had never once measured the thing that mattered, and that this was not a failure of the instruments but the whole shape of the truth. That what a being does with power it has been certain no one would survive the holding back. The door closed gently. The choosing that got faster too leaves no mark, and is the only thing worth the leaving. The last conversation Sethin and Ren had about the delay happened on the day he handed the ward to someone younger, in the flat bright light of the world below, which had not changed at all in 11 years, while everyone under it had changed entirely. He was old now. The meridic aged slowly and then all at once, and the all at once had come for him that season, and he had done the sensible thing and named a successor while his hands were still steady enough to teach her. The 4-armed junior who had been thrown at the sunward wall on the day it failed, grown now into a physician adept of her own, steady, careful, the kind of surgeon who would tell the truth to people who came a long way to hear a yes. She was down the ward learning the shape of it. Sethin sat in the second chair, the one that had been his for 11 years beside the first chair, the wrong one which had been Ren's for the same 11, and the 2 of them watched the light. "You never asked me the thing you wanted to ask me," Ren said. "For 11 years. You want to ask it before you hand the ward over. Ask it." Sethin folded his 4 hands, slower than they had once folded. "You always know." "There's no gap between me knowing and me saying any more," Ren said. "You know that. You took it out. Ask." So he asked the thing he had carried since the 11th day of the worst year of his life, the objection he had filed against his own hands and never fully withdrawn. "Do you wish I had said no?" Sethin said. "On the 9th day, when you asked me to cut it. You were 19 and frightened, and you asked me for a thing no one in the coalition had ever chosen, and I said no for 8 days and yes on the 9th, and I have wondered every day since whether the healer's answer should have been the first one. Whether I did a kindness or only lost a war of attrition to a frightened girl who did not yet know what she was asking. Tell me, you are the only one who can. Do you wish I had held to the no?" Ren was quiet a while. She still did that now on purpose, in a body that had no need of it. She had learned over 11 years to spend time she did not have to spend, because she had decided that a person who could answer instantly should sometimes choose not to, so the people around her would not feel slow. It was the kindest thing Sethin had ever watched anyone teach themselves. "No," she said finally, "and I'll tell you why, and then you're going to hand this ward over and stop carrying me around, because I'm tired of being the weight you never set down." She turned in the wrong chair and looked at him, and her flat cold eyes were, as they had always been under the coldness, not unkind. "You think you took something out of me. You've thought it for 11 years. You keep calling it a delay, a leash, a governor, a waiting room. You keep naming it like it was a part of me and you cut the part out. That's the mistake. That's the whole mistake, and you've built a year of guilt and 11 years of penance on it. It was a part of you, Sethan said. It was the oldest part. The species evolved it. I measured it. You measured a wall, Ren said. Not a room, a wall. The delay wasn't a part of me. It was a wall between me and myself. 19 years I lived on one side of it, see the thing coming, feel the fear, hands too slow, wait to find out if I die. That wasn't me being careful. That was me being trapped behind a wall from my own hands, watching my life happen a beat late, scared the whole time because I could never reach the moment I was actually in. You didn't cut a part of me out, Doctor. You took down the wall. For the first time in my life, I got to be in the same instant as my own hands. Everything I am, the choosing, the mercy, the sitting with Vesh, the wall I held, the four you said yes to, all of that was always there on the far side of the wall, waiting for me to be able to reach it in time. You didn't make me. You let me arrive. Sethan sat with it. 11 years of penance shifted in him and did not quite fall. The Sarn thought you took out my safety and left a monster, Ren said. The Directorate thought you took out my safety and left a weapon. You thought you took out my safety and left a person who couldn't choose. You were all looking at the wall and calling it the safety. But the safety was never the wall. Nothing dangerous was ever held back by me being slow. I was just as dangerous behind the wall, I just couldn't reach it in time to matter. The safety was the choosing room, and the choosing room isn't in the nerves, and you couldn't cut it if you tried, and you didn't. You left every safety I ever had. You just took away the thing that made me watch my whole life from a beat behind. She looked back at the light. I don't wish you'd said no. I wish you'd forgiven yourself 10 years sooner so you didn't spend a whole career of good years thinking the best thing you ever did was a wound. It wasn't a wound. It was the door. Now hand over the ward and go rest, and stop measuring me for a coffin I was never in. Down the ward, the young physician adept who would inherit all of it looked up from her first solo intake, uncertain, and Ren lifted one hand a few degrees. The small motion that had once made the fastest blade in the coalition flinch. And the young Meridic understood it as the reassurance it was and steadied, and went back to telling a frightened arrival the truth. Sethan watched his successor do the work and felt the 11 years finally come loose in him, all at once, the Meridic way. You are a difficult patient, he said. You have always been a difficult patient. I'm the best patient you ever had, Ren said. I'm the only one who ever told you what you actually did. Everybody else you had to figure out with instruments. Me you just had to listen to, and it took you 12 years. She almost smiled. There and gone faster than anything alive could catch. Go on, Doctor. You did good. Say it back to me. I'll wait. I've gotten good at waiting on purpose. I did good, Sethan said. The words came slowly, and they came whole, and something that had been standing on its edge in him for 12 years lay down at last and was quiet. I did good, and I will stop measuring you for a wound. You have my word, and a Meridic's word outlasts a Meridic, so it will hold after I am gone. He unfolded his 4 hands and looked at them, old now and steady still, the hands that had opened a frightened girl's skull and found the longest leash in the coalition, and on the 9th day chosen to take down a wall. I spent 40 years believing my work was the repair. The bone knit, the pressure relieved, the soldier sent back whole. I was proud of it. It was good work. And then a 19-year-old asked me a question I did not have an honest reason to refuse, and it took me 12 years and a broken scale and a duelmaster on his knees and an enemy's first steps to understand that the repair was never the work. The repair was the beginning. The work was the door, knowing when to open it, and for whom, and how rarely, and having the steadiness to say no to nearly everyone who came a long way to hear a yes. I could not have done that work at 30. I needed the whole 40 years to learn to refuse well. You did not cost me a career, Ren. You gave me the only part of it that mattered at the very end, when I had finally become steady enough to be trusted with it. Ren nodded once, and did not say you're welcome, because that was for orderlies and duelmasters, and this was neither. He handed over the ward that evening. There was no ceremony. The meridic did not mark transitions with ceremony, and this ward least of all, having learned to distrust the kind of records that ceremonies made. He simply walked the young physician adept through the last of it, the intake protocols and the registry's standing restrictions, and the 4 names he had said yes to in 11 years, which he gave her not as a record but as a warning, so she would understand how rarely the honest answer was yes. And then he took off the surgical overrobe he had worn for a working lifetime and folded it and set it down, and it made no sound at all, which was the right amount of sound for the thing. "You'll refuse most of them," he told his successor. "It will not get easier, it should not. The day it gets easy is the day you have started measuring walls and calling them safeties, and on that day you must hand this ward to someone who still finds the refusing hard." She made the meridic gesture of a charge accepted, all 4 hands crossed, the same gesture she had made as a stunned junior at Ren's feet on the day the wall failed, and Sethin returned it, and that was the whole of it. He did not leave Sur Station. There was nowhere he wanted to be that was not the long ward in the flat bright light of the world below, and so he stayed and sat in the second chair some days beside the first chair, the wrong one, and watched his patient do the work that had no instrument to measure it, sitting with the frightened, telling the certain the truth, standing on the narrow border between a person and the knife, and letting almost no one cross. He lived 4 more years. They were good ones. He had set the weight down, and a being who has carried a weight for 12 years does not know, until he sets it down, how much of what he called his spine was only the weight. Ren was with him at the end, in the wrong chair in the light. He did not go hard. The meridic went the way they aged, slowly and then all at once, and the all at once, when it came, found him ready and unafraid, which surprised him a little, because he had spent his life among the fast frightened peoples and had assumed fear was the last thing anyone set down. "You're not scared," Ren said. She had turned her chair to face his. "I can tell. You spent a year terrified you'd broken me, and you're not scared of this at all. Why?" "Because you taught me where the fear lives," Sethin said. His voice was very quiet now. "It lives in the gap, in the waiting room, in the beat between seeing the thing come and being able to reach it. I have watched you for 15 years, and I have learned the thing your species learned on its terrible young world and then buried under a wall so deep it forgot, that the fear was never in the dying. It was in the waiting, and I find at the end that I am not waiting. I am in the same instant as the thing that is happening to me, for the first time in a long life, and there is no room left in it to be afraid." The 3 vents along his throat moved slow. "You gave that to me. I gave you a door, and you spent 15 years teaching me how to walk through it, and now I am walking through it, and it is not a wound, Ren. You were right. It was never a wound. It was the door all along." Ren took his oldest hand in both of her small ones, the grip that could have crushed the bone, and instead offered exactly as much as he needed, and not 1 measure more, the grip that arrived wherever you were about to fall. And she held it while the physician who had freed her stepped through the last door there was, unafraid in the same instant as his own leaving. Afterward she sat in the wrong chair a long time, in the flat bright light, and did not hurry, because she had gotten good over the years, at spending time she did not have to spend. She stayed on at the ward after him. The young physician adept ran it well and refused well, and found the refusing hard, exactly as she should. And when the frightened came, and they kept coming, the way they always would, drawn by a legend the coalition had never managed to file, it was still Ren who sat with them, small and gray-collared and unhurried, the deadliest thing the galaxy had ever failed to measure, telling them the truth in a voice that never rose. She told them the truth she had told a tired healer at the very end, that the door was not the danger, and the speed was not the danger, and nothing worth fearing had ever been held back by a person being slow. That the wall they thought was their safety was only the thing that made them watch their own lives from a beat behind. that the safety had never been in the nerves at all. It was in the room where you decided who you were. And you built that room slowly, over a whole life, on the far side of the wall. And if you built it strong enough then, it did not matter how fast your hands became, because your hands would only ever do the things you had already, carefully, over years, decided you were. And then she told them the last part, the part that was hers, the part no instrument would ever measure and no record would ever hold. That she had been 19 and terrified in a gap on a border that was not worth 3 days of anyone's fear. That a healer had taken down the wall and let her arrive in her own life. And that in 15 years of being the fastest thing in the coalition, the only thing she had ever done with all that arriving, the only thing worth doing, was to be there, already there, wherever a falling person was about to hit the floor, having decided, long before anyone put a floor or a blade or a wall in front of her, to hold them up. That was the whole of it. She would tell them, and they would understand or they would not, and either way she would sit with them in the light a while longer, the small, unhurried woman in the wrong chair, who had learned the hardest thing there was to learn about being faster than anyone alive, which was when to be still.